Konnichiwa no minasama, anata wa genki desu ka? Husky no biohazard no shoujo Sabrina desu. Kyou wa biohazard o pure shimasu. Junbei wa ii desu ka? Hey everyone, how's it going? It's your favorite Resident Evil girl, Sabrina here, and today we are going to be continuing our reading of The Umbrella Conspiracy. Anyway, so we left off on chapter 13. We're starting with a note to Alma. The last thing that happened was a little interaction between Wesker and Barry, where Wesker was telling him that he has to continue, like, you know, being evil, like, you know, just like going behind everyone's backs and stuff to help Wesker get to the laboratory. Yeah, so that was pretty much where we left off. We're gonna get started today on chapter 13, and it's gonna be great. So, I hope you all had a wonderful night last night. It was a pleasure to see you guys today. I'm trying to think. I thought I had something to tell you guys, and like I'm coming up blank here. Well, I'll probably remember it in a second. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that it's kind of crazy that fell, because just a little bit ago I had like a little like power brick for my monitor fall like beneath the thing, and like all of that stuff just fell over, like ripped my keyboard out of like off the desk. It was wild. And then I could turn around and then this stuff falls, and it was just like, oh my god, it was crazy. Hi Sabrina. Hello, how's it going? Pleasure to see you. Welcome to stream. Oh, also, hello YouTube main. Pleasure to see you. I forgot to say that when I first joined. I really liked those comments you made about like the like whatever, like it was like playing a game but it was like in text. Like that was awesome. I thought that was really cool. How are you today? I'm gonna pick this stuff up while you reply because I don't want to leave it all over the floor. Especially not House of the Dead 2. I feel so bad that it fell. I do like the little art though. It's cool. Oh, where'd the booklet go? Oh, there it is. I was like, wait a minute. This is also in the original case. Oh, I'm very proud of it. Which, I mean, I'm sure House of the Dead 2 copies aren't like that hard to find, but I was really excited to add that to my collection. Along with the Japanese Resident Evil 0. Here we go. All set back up. Alright. How am I? I'm doing alright. Today's been pretty hectic for me. I've been running around all over the place, and I'm just happy to finally be here and get to read for you guys. It's really great. Let's go. Hey Tom, how's it going? Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you as always. Any retro game in mint feels nice to have. I agree with you completely. It's like it makes you feel better inside almost. You know what I mean? It makes me really sad that disc rot is a thing and that this is eventually gonna die. Same with RE5, Carrier, the Biohazard Zero. Like, it just makes me sad that like disc was even a format that was used. It's not good for preservation. So, I don't know. But anyway, yeah. Hello 263, how's it going? Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you as always. I don't know if you guys were here when I said this, but we are starting on chapter 13. It's a note to my dearest Alma. And the last chapter was Wesker and Barry talking to each other. Wesker is telling him that he still needs his help to get to the laboratory. So that's where we're at in the book. And that's where we're going to be starting off today. $102. There's already discs with disc rot from this era. It's like 20 years, 10 to 20 years. But, yeah. So I'm gonna send my links out and then we'll get started. You're fine? Well, it's good to hear. I'm glad you're doing good. There we go. We are all good. HT DVD is the worst. Warner acknowledges they goofed on those. A lot of those are already coasters. Yeah, exactly. Well, it made them money though. Okay. Well, yeah, and today's flavor is Pipeline Punch. I was gonna come out with another like discontinued unique flavor, but I was like, nah, I'll save it for like next week. Like you know, do another Tuesday stream with it or something. I feel like I'll need it then. But now the Pipeline Punch really hit today, so it was good. Then again, that reminds me, I don't think Mitchell shows up to the book readings, but if he did, there's Pipeline Punch today. All right. Well, we can get started. Chapter 13. My dearest Alma, I sit here trying to think of where to begin, of how to explain in a few simple words all that's happened in my life since we last spoke, and I already fail. I hope this letter finds you well and whole, and that you will forgive the tangents of my pen. This isn't easy for me. Even as I write, I can feel the simplest of concepts slipping away, lost to feelings of despair and confusion. But I have to tell you what's in my heart before I can rest. Be patient and accept what I tell you is the truth. The entire story would take hours for me to tell you, and time is short. So accept these things as fact. Last month there was an accident in the lab and the virus we were studying escaped. All of my colleagues who were infected are dead or dying, and the nature of the disease is such that those still living here lost their senses. This virus robs its victims of their humanity, forcing them in their sickness to seek out and destroy life. Even as I write these words, I can hear them, pressing against my locked door like mindless, hungry animals, crying out like lost souls. There aren't words true enough, deep enough, to describe the sorrow and shame that I feel knowing that I had a hand in their creation. I feel that they feel nothing now, no fear or pain, but they can't experience the horror of what they've become doesn't free me of my terrible burden. I am, in part, responsible for this nightmare that surrounds me. In spite of the guilt that is burned into my very being that will haunt my every breath, I have tried to survive, if only to see you again. My best efforts only delayed the inevitable. I am infected, and there is no cure for what will follow, except to end my life before I lose the only thing that separates me from them, my love for you. Please understand. Please know that I'm sorry. Martin Crackhorn. Oh my gosh, I started reading before switching the thing. Thank you. Damn, I'm gonna have to edit that out. Thank you. I wonder if these guys could have ever made a way out if they just looked instead of writing notes. Yeah, I know, right? Well, if they're already infected, they're already infected. So I think it's funny that they had like a vaccine in Nest, but not in the mansion. They're like, oh yeah, this isn't the department that's working on yeah, no, you guys don't need a vaccine or nothing. It's all good. Unless it was developed after, but I like to think that they had it at the same time and they're just being Umbrella and just not carrying them. There is no cure, Carlos' honest reaction. Yeah, for real. Alright. Jill sighed, laying the crumpled paper gently on the desk. The creatures were victims of their own research. It seemed she'd have the right idea about what had happened in the mansion, though reading the heartfelt letter put a serious damper on any pride she might have taken from her deduction skills. After placing the sun crest, she decided that the upstairs office merited a closer look, and with a little digging she'd found the final scrawled testament of Crackhorn tucked in a drawer. Crackhorn, Martin Crackhorn, that was one of the names on Trent's list. Jill frowned, walking slowly back to the office door. For some reason, Trent wanted the stars to figure out what had happened at the mansion before anyone else did, but with as much as he obviously knew about it, why did not just tell them outright? And what did he stand to gain by telling them anything at all? She stepped through the office's small foyer and back out into the hall, still frowning. Barry had been acting strange before, and she needed to find out why. Maybe she could get a straight answer if she just asked him outright. Or maybe not. Either way, it'll tell me something. Jill stopped by the back stairs, taking a deep breath, and realized that something was different. She looked around uncertainly, trying to figure out what it was her senses were telling her. It's warmer. Just a little, but it's definitely warmer, and the air isn't quite as stale. Like someone had opened a window or maybe a door. Jill turned and jogged down the stairs, suddenly anxious to check the puzzle lock. Reaching the bottom of the steps, she saw that the door connecting one hall to the next was standing open. She could hear crickets singing faintly, feel the fresh air night wafting toward her through the frigid mustiness of the house. She hurried to the dark corridor and hooked right, trying not to get her hopes up. Another sharp right, and she could see the door that led to the covered walkway standing open. Maybe that's all it is. It doesn't mean the puzzle's solved. Jill broke into a run, feeling the clean warmth of summer air against her skin as she rounded the corner in the stone path. Anne let out a short, triumphant laugh as she saw the 4 crests placed next to the open door. A warm breeze was flowing through the room that the puzzle had unlocked, a small storage shed for gardening tools. The metal door on the wall opposite standing open, and Jill could see the moonlight playing across a brick wall just past the rusted hinges. Barry had been right. The door led outside. They'd be able to get help now and find a safe route through the woods, or at least signal. But if Barry found the missing pieces, why didn't he come looking for me? Jill's grin faded as she stepped into the shed, absently taking in the dusty boxes and barrels that lined the gray stone walls. Barry had known where she was, had suggested himself that she take the second floor of the west wing, so maybe it wasn't Barry who opened the door. True, it could have been Chris or Wesker or one of the Bravos. If that was the case, she should probably go back and look for Barry. Or investigate a little first, make sure it's worth the effort. It was a bit of a rationalization, but she had to admit to herself that the thought of returning to the mansion with a possible escape in front of her wasn't all that enticing. She unholstered her Beretta and walked towards the outer door, her decision made. The first thing she noticed was the sound of rushing water over the soft forest noises that filled the cooling air, like a waterfall. The second and third were bodies of 2 dogs that lay across the irregular stone path, shot to death. Pretty safe bet that one of the stars came this way. Jill edged into the high-walled courtyard, low hedges set into the brick planters on either side. Dark clouds hung oppressively low overhead. Across the open space was a barred iron gate just past an island of shrubs. To her left, a straight path overshadowed by the 10-foot-high brick walls that bordered it. The gentle waterfall sound seemed to come from that direction, though the path ended abruptly in a metal gate a few feet high. Stairs going down, maybe? Jill hesitated and looked back at the arched, rusty gate in front of her, and then at the curled bodies of the mutant dogs. They were closer to the gate than the walkway, and assuming they'd been killed while attacking, the shooter would have been headed in that direction. There was a sudden sound of water splashing wildly, making the decision for her. Jill turned and ran down the moonlit walk, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was making that noise. She reached the end of the stone path and leaned over the gate, and drew back a little, surprised by the sudden drop-off. There were no stairs. The gate opened to a tiny platform elevator in a huge open courtyard 20 feet below. The splashing was off to the right, and Jill looked down and across the wide yard just in time to see a shadowy figure walk through the waterfall she'd heard, disappearing behind the curtain of water that cascaded down the west wall. What the hell? She stared at the small waterfall, blinking, not sure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. The splashing had stopped as soon as the person disappeared, and she was fairly certain that she wasn't hearing things, which meant that the rushing water concealed a secret passage. Great, that's just what this place needs. Lord knows I didn't get enough of that inside. The controls for the one-man lift were on the metal bar next to a rusting gate. The platform itself the platform itself down in the courtyard. Jill toggled the power switch, but nothing happened. She'd have to get down another way, wasting time while the mysterious splasher got further away. Unless... Jill looked down the narrow elevator shaft, an inset square only 3 feet across and open on the side facing the yard. Coming up would be a bitch, but descending? Cake. She could crouch her way down in a minute or less, using her back legs to support her weight, and she unstrapped the shotgun from her back in preparation for the climb. A disturbing thought occurred to her. The person who'd gone through the waterfall was one of the stars. How had they known that the passage was even there? Good question, and not one she wanted to linger over. Holding the shotgun tightly, Jill pushed the gate open and carefully stared down the shaft. Okay, I'm going to grab my gloves because my hands are getting sweaty already. So, apologize. These gloves worked really good last time, so I'm just going to do that. Yeah, the gloves are awesome. They really saved me from, like, from ruining the book. I feel like they don't go with this outfit, though. But then again, does any RE protagonist care if the fingerless gloves go with the outfit? No, let's be honest. I am going to take this opportunity, though, to say this is your first hydration reminder. If you got your water or monster next to you, make sure you take a sip. Gotta stay hydrated. The hooded man in RE9 trailers, Trent for sure. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, Trent. Heck yes, Serena Wesker ASMR. Hey Ben, how's it going? Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you as always. Gloves for the win, that's right. Okay. Let us continue. They'd given Barry a full 15 minutes before heading through the winding halls of the West Wing and finding the open back door. They stood there now, looking at the slab of copper and its 4 engraved crests. Chris stared at the crescent moon that Barry had taken, feeling confused and a little more than a little worried. Barry is one of the most honest, straightforward guys that he had ever known, and if he said that he was going to look for Jill and then come back for them, then that's what he meant to do. But he didn't come back, and if he ran into trouble, how did the piece I gave him end up here? He didn't like any of the explanations his mind was giving him to work with. Someone could have taken it from him. He could have placed it himself and then been injured somehow. The possibilities seemed endless, and none of them good. Sighing, he turned away from the diagram and looked at Rebecca. Whatever happened to Barry, we should go ahead. This may be the only way off the estate. Rebecca smiled a little. Well, fine by me. It just feels good to get out here, you know? Yeah, no kidding, he said with feeling. He hadn't realized how accustomed he'd grown to the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the house until they left it. The difference was truly amazing. They walked through the tidy storage room and stopped at the back door, both of them breathing deeply. Rebecca checked her Beretta for about the 100th time since they'd left the main hall, chewing at her lower lip nervously. Chris could see how tightly wound she was and tried to think if there was anything she needed to know. Anything that would help her if they were forced into a combat situation. Star's training covered all the basics, but shooting at a video screen with a toy gun was a far cry from the real thing. He grinned suddenly, remembering the words of wisdom he'd gotten on his first operation, a standoff with a small group of whacked-out survivalists in upstate New York. He'd been terrified and trying desperately not to show it. The captain for the mission had been a tough-as-nails explosives expert, an extremely short woman named Kyler. She pulled him aside just before they went in, looked him up and down, and given him a single best piece of advice he'd ever received. Son, she said, no matter what happens when the shooting starts, try not to wet your pants. It had surprised him out of nervousness, the statement so totally weird that he'd literally been forced to let go of the worst of his fear to make room for it. What are you grinning about? Chris shook his head, the smile fading. Somehow he didn't think it would work on Rebecca. and the dangers they faced didn't shoot back. Long story. Come on, let's go. They moved out into the calm night air, crickets and cicadas buzzing sleepily in the surrounding woods. They were in kind of a courtyard, high brick walls on either side, an offshoot walkway to their left. Chris could hear rushing water nearby and the mournful cry of a dog or coyote in the distance, a lonely, faraway sound. Speaking of dogs, there were a couple of them sprawled out across the stones, the soft moonlight glistening against their wet, snowy bodies. Chris edged up to one of them and crouched down, touching its flank. He quickly pulled out his hand, scowling. The mutant dog was sticky and warm, like it had been sheathed in a layer of mucus. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. Hasn't been dead long, he said quickly. Less than an hour, anyway. There was a rusted iron gate just past some hedges in front of them. Chris nodded at Rebecca as they walked towards it. The sound of rushing water increased to a dull roar. Chris pushed at the gate and it swung open on violently squealing hinges, revealing a huge cut stone reservoir, easily the size of a couple swimming pools put together. Deep shadows draped and hung at every side, caused by the seemingly solid walls of murky green trees and lush vegetation that threatened to break through the bordering rails. They moved forward, stopping at the edge of the massive pool. It was apparently in the slow process of being drained, the turbulent noise caused by the narrow flow of water through the raised gate on the crest said. There wasn't a complete path around the reservoir, but Chris saw that there was a walkway bisecting the pool itself, about 5 feet below the water level. There were bolted ladders at both sides, and the path had obviously been submerged until quite recently, the stones dark with dripping algae. Chris studied the unusual setup for a moment, wondering how anyone got across when it wasn't being drained. Another mystery to add to the growing list. Without speaking, they climbed down and hurried across, boots squelching against the slimy stones and clammy humidity enveloping them. Chris quickly scaled the second ladder, reaching down to help Rebecca up. The heavily shaded path was littered with branches and pine needles and appeared to border the east end of the reservoir, passing over the open floodgate. They only started towards the forced waterfall and had only gotten a few feet when it started to rain. Plop, plop, plop. Chris frowned, an inner voice informing him coolly that he shouldn't be able to hear raindrops over the roar of the draining water. He looked up and saw a twisted branch fall from the stretching foliage hanging over a rail, a branch that hit the stones and slid smoothly away. That's not a branch! And there were dozens of them already on the ground, twisting across the dark stones, hissing and writhing as they fell from the trees overhead. He and Rebecca were surrounded by snakes. Oh, shit! Startled, Rebecca turned to look at Chris and felt cold terror shoot through her heart squeezed in an icy grip as she took the path behind him. The ground had come to life, black shapes coiling toward their feet and dropping from above like living rain. Rebecca started to raise her gun, realizing numbly that there was too many, even as Chris roughly grabbed her arm. Run! They stumbled forward, Rebecca carrying out involuntarily as a thick, writhing body fell across her shoulder, a touch of cool scales against her arm as it slid heavily off and hit the stones. The path zigzagged as they ran through the shifting shadows, heels crunching down on rubbery, moving flesh, throwing them off balance. Snakes darted toward to strike their passing boots as they ran over a steel gate, black, foaming water thundering below, the sound of their boots hitting metal lost to the liquid roar. Ahead of them, the stones were clear, but the path also dropped off sharply, a small elevator platform marking its end. There was no place left to go. They crowded on the tiny platform and Rebecca snatched at the controls, her breath coming in panicked gasp. Chris turned and fired repeatedly, the shots blasting over the crash of water as Rebecca found the operating button and slammed it down. The platform shuddered and started to descend, slipping down past the rock walls toward a massive, empty courtyard below. Rebecca turned, raising the Beretta to help Chris, and felt her jaw drop, her throat locking at the gruesome scene. There had to be hundreds of them, the path almost completely hidden by the slithering creatures, hissing and squirming in an alien frenzy as they struck wildly at each other. By the time she managed to unfreeze, the loathsome sight had risen past eye level and was gone. The ride seemed to last forever, both of them staring up at the edge of the path they'd left behind, tensely, breathlessly waiting for the bodies to start falling. When the lift was within a few feet of the bottom, they both jumped off, stumbling quickly away from the wall. They both leaned against the cool rock, gasping. Rebecca took in the courtyard as they escaped in between shuddering breaths, letting the sound of the splashing waterfall soothe their nerves. It was a huge open space made out of brick and stone, the colors washed out in hazy, frail light. The water from the reservoir above tumbled down into 2 stone pools nearby, and there was a single gate across from them. And no snakes. She took a final deep breath and blew it out, then turned to Chris. Were you bit? He shook his head. You? No, she said, although if it's all the same to you, I'd rather not go back that way. I'm more of a cat person, really. Chris stared at her for a moment and then grinned, pushing away from the wall. Funny, I would have figured you for lab rats. Beep beep. The radio. Rebecca grabbed at the unit hooked to her belt, the snake suddenly forgotten. It was a sound she'd been hoping to hear ever since they found Richard. They were being hailed, maybe by searchers? She thumbed the receiver and held up the radio so they could both hear. Static crackled through the tiny speaker along with the soft whine of wavering signal. This is Brad, Alpha Team, Reed. If you can hear this. His voice disappeared in a burst of static. Rebecca hit the translate button and spoke quickly. Brad, come in. The signal was gone. They both listened for a moment longer, but nothing else came through. He must have gotten out of range, Chris said. He sighed, walking further into the open yard and gazing up at the dark, overcast sky. Rebecca clipped the silent radio back to her belt, still feeling more hopeful than she had all night. The pilot was out there somewhere, circling around and looking for them. Now that they were clear of the mansion, they'd be able to hear him signal, assuming he comes back. Rebecca ignored the thought and walked over to join Chris, who had found another tiny elevator platform tucked in the corner across from the waterfall. A quick check showed it to be without power. Chris turned towards the gate, slapping a fresh clip into his Beretta. Shall we see what's behind door number 1? It was a rhetorical question. Unless they wanted to go back through the snakes, it was their only option. Just the same, Rebecca smiled and nodded, wanting to make sure he knew that she was ready, and hoping desperately that if anything else happened, she would be. Alright. And that is the end of chapter 13. Remember, guys, 8 p.m. is the scheduled pee break. It probably won't be 8, because we just finished the chapter at, like, 7:49, so... I'm not gonna lie, the gloves aren't helping this time, though. It's, like, almost making it worse. So I'm like, what do I do? I guess I'll just take them off. Barry got so sick of Jill, he decided to just join Chris and Rebecca campaign instead. Imagine she said she preferred snakes after what happened to Richard. It's great. Yeah, because, like... Yeah, she did see the snake, right? I know Chris went in the... No, because Chris went in the room alone and killed it. And then he met her back outside, I think. I don't know. I can't remember, but... Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah. I feel so bad for this book. It doesn't deserve this. At all. Too good of a book to deserve that. Yeah, give me 1 second. I wanted to grab something to dry my hands off with, so I apologize. Alright. But I think we're ready to get into the next chapter. In chapter 14, Jill stood at the edge of a yawning open pit in the dank tunnel, staring helplessly at the door on the other side. The pit was too wide to safely jump, and there was no way to climb down, at least not that she could see. She'd have to go back and try the door by the ladder. Her frustrated sigh turned into a shiver. The damp chill emanating from the stone walls would have been bad enough without her being dripping wet. Great secret passage. To use it, you have to catch pneumonia. A glint of metal caught her gaze as she turned, feet squelching in her boots. She peered down at it, brushing a wet strand of hair out of her eyes. It was a small iron plate set into the stone, a 6-sided hole about the size of a quarter at the center. She looked back at the door thoughtfully. Maybe it works a bridge or lower stairs? It didn't matter since she didn't have whatever tool it required. It was as good as dead end. Besides, it was unlikely that whoever she'd seen walking through the waterfall had managed to get across. Jill walked back through the twisting passage toward the entrance to the tunnel, still in awe of what she'd found behind the curtain of water. It appeared that there was a whole network of tunnels running beneath the estate. The walls were rough and uneven, chunks of sandy limestone protruding at odd angles. but the sheer amount of work that had gone into creating the underground path was mind-boggling. She reached the metal door next to the ladder, having to make a conscious effort not to let her teeth chatter as the cold draft swept down from the courtyard above. The sound of the waterfall was strangely muted. The steady, echoing rhythm of water dripping to the rock floor was much louder, giving the tunnels a somewhat medieval feel. She pulled the door open and froze, feeling a rush of mixed emotions as Barry Burton whirled around to face her, revolver in hand. Surprise won. Barry? He quickly lowered his weapon and looked as shocked as she felt, and it was just about as wet, too. His t-shirt clung to his broad shoulders, his short hair plastered to his skull. Jill, how'd you get down here? Same way you did, apparently, but how did you know? He held up his hand, shushing her. Listen. They stood in tense silence, Jill looking up and down the stone corridor, failing to hear whatever Barry had heard. There were metal doors at either end, cast in shadowy by the dim utility lights overhead. I thought I heard some, he said finally. Voices. Before she could ask any questions, he turned and faced her, smiling uneasily. Look, I'm sorry I didn't wait for you, but I heard somebody walking out in the garden and had to take a look. I found this place by accident, kind of tripped and fell in. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. Let's check around and see what we can dig up. Jill nodded, but decided to keep a close eye on Barry for a while. Maybe she was paranoid, but in spite of his words, he didn't seem all that happy to see her. Watch and wait, her mind whispered. For now, there was nothing else she could do. Barry led them toward a door to the right, holding up his Colt. He pulled the handle, revealing another gloomy tunnel. A few steps to the right was another metal door, and across from it, the passage veered sharply into almost complete darkness. Barry motioned at the door, and Jill nodded. He pushed it open, and the two of them moved in towards another silent corridor. Jill sighed inwardly as she studied the bare, rocky walls, wishing that she had a piece of chalk with her. The tunnel that they were in now looked pretty much like all the rest of them, turning left up ahead. She already felt lost, and hoped that there weren't too many more twists and turns. Hello, who's there? A deep, familiar voice shouted from somewhere ahead of them, the words echoing through the passage. Enrico? Jill called out. Jill, is that you? Excited, Jill ran the last few steps of the corner and around, Barry right behind her. The Bravo team leader was alive, and somehow ended up here. Jill rounded the next corner and saw him sitting against the wall, the tunnel widening out and ending in a shadowy alcove. Hold it, stop right there. She froze, staring at the bread he had pointed at her. He was injured, blood seeping from his leg and puddling on the floor. Are you with anyone, Jill? His dark eyes were narrowed with suspicion, the black bore of his semi-automatic unwavering. Barry's here too, Enrico. What happened? What's this about? As Barry stepped out from behind the corner, Enrico stared at them both for a long moment, his gaze darting back and forth nervously, and then he sagged, lowering his gun as he fell back against the stones. Barry and Jill hurried over, crouching down next to the wounded Bravo. I'm sorry, he said weakly. I had to make sure. It was as though defending himself had taken his last bit of strength. Jill took his hand gently, alarmed at how pale he was. Blood oozed from his thigh, his pants soaked with it. This whole thing was a setup, he breathed, turning his watering gaze towards her. I got lost, climbed the fence, saw the tunnels, found the paper. Umbrella knew all along. Barry looked stricken, his face almost as white as Enrico's. Hang on, Rico, we'll get you... Oh, wait, I think that's Barry saying. Hang on, Rico, we'll get you out of here. You just have to lie still. Enrico shook his head, still looking at Jill. There's a traitor in the stars, he whispered. He told me. Bam, bam. Enrico's body jumped as two holes suddenly appeared in his chest, blood pulsing out of them in violent spurts. Though the resounding echo of the shots, running footsteps clattered away down the corridor behind them. Barry launched to his feet and sprinted around the corner as Jill helplessly squeezed Enrico's twitching hand, her heart pounding and sick. He slumped over, dead, before he touched the cold stone floor. Her mind flooded with questions as Barry pursuing steps faded away, silence settling once again over the deep shadows. What paper had the Bravo found? When Enrico said traitor, she'd immediately thought of Barry, acting so strangely, but he'd been right beside her when the shots had been fired. So who did this? Who was Trent talking about? Who did Enrico see? Feeling lost and alone, Jill held his cooling hand and waited for Barry to come back. Rebecca was going through an old trunk pushed against one wall of the room they'd entered, shuffling through the stacks of papers and frowning while Chris checked out the rest of the room. A single rumpled cot, a desk, a towering ancient bookshelf were the only pieces of furniture. After the cold alien splendor of the mansion, Chris was absurdly grateful to be in simpler surroundings. They'd come to a house at the end of a long, winding path from the courtyard, much smaller and infinitely less intimidating than the mansion. The hall they'd stepped into was plain, undecorated wood, as there were two small bedrooms they discovered just off the silent corridor. Chris figured they'd found a bunkhouse for some of the mansion's employees. He noticed the thick, unmarked dust in the hallway and on their way in with a sinking resignation, realizing that none of the other stars had made it out of the main house. With no way for him and Rebecca to get back, all they could do was try to find the back door and go for help. Chris didn't like it, but there weren't any other options. After a brief perusal of the shelves, Chris walked to the battered wooden desk and pulled at the top drawer. It was locked. He bent down and felt alongside the bottom drawer, grinning as his fingers touched a thick piece of tape. Don't people ever watch movies? The key's always stuck under the drawer. He peeled the tape away and came up with a tiny silver key. Still grinning, he unlocked the drawer and pulled it open. There was a deck of playing cards, a few pens and pencils, gum wrappers, a crumpled pack of cigarettes, junk mostly, the kind of stuff that always seemed to accumulate in desk drawers. Bingo! Chris picked up the key ring by its leather tag, pleased with himself. If finding the exit was this easy, they'd be on their way back to Raccoon in no time. Looks like we just got a break, he said softly, holding up the keys. The leather tag had the word alias burned into one side, the number 345 written on the back in a smudged ballpoint pen. Chris didn't know the significance of the number, but he remembered the nickname from the diary he'd found in the mansion. Thank you, Mr. Alias. Assuming the keys were for the bunkhouse, that they were much closer to getting off the estate. Rebecca was still sitting by the trunk, surrounded by papers, envelopes, and even a few grainy photos that she'd pulled out. She seemed totally absorbed in whatever she was reading, and when Chris walked over to join her, she looked at him with eyes clouded by worry. You find anything? Rebecca held up the piece of paper she was reading. A couple of things. Listen to this. 4 days since the accident, and the plant at point 42 is still growing and mutating at an incredible rate. She skipped ahead, skimming the page, and with one finger as she spoke. It calls this thing Plant 42 and says its root is in the basement. Here, shortly after the accident, one of the infected members of the research team became violent and broke the water tank in the basement, flooding the entire section. We think that some of the trace chemical used in the T-virus test contaminated the water and contributed to Plant 42's radical mutations. A number of shoots have already been traced to different parts of the building, but the main plant now hangs from the ceiling in the large conference room on the first floor. We've determined that Plant 42 has become sensitive to movement and is now carnivorous. In close proximity to humans, it uses tentacular prehensile vines to entrap its prey, while leech-like adaptations latch onto exposed skin and draw fatal quantities of blood. Several members of the staff had already fallen victim to this. It's dated May 21st, signed Henry Sarton. Chris shook his head, wondering again how someone could invent a virus like the one they had come across. It seemed to infect everything it touched with madness, transforming its carrier into a deadly carnivore, hungry for blood. God, now a man-eating plant? Chris shuddered suddenly twice, as glad they'd be leaving soon. So, it infects plants too. So it infects plants too, he said. When we report this, we'll have to... No, that's not it, she said, and she handed him a photo, her expression grim. It was a blurry snapshot of a middle-aged man wearing a lab coat. He was standing stiffly in front of a plain wooden door, and Chris realized that it was the very door he had come through not 10 minutes ago, the entrance to the bunkhouse. He flipped the picture over, squinting at the tiny script on the back. H. Sarton, January 98, point 42. He stared at Rebecca, understanding her fearful gaze. They were standing in point 42. The carnivorous plant was here. I went to get a drink of water, too. Wesker stood in the darkness of the unlit tunnel, his irritation growing as he listened to Barry stumble through the echoing corridors. Jill wouldn't wait forever, and the raging Mr. Burton couldn't seem to grasp that Enrico's killer had simply slid into the shadows just around the corner, the most obvious place there was. Come on, come on. Since they left the house, he finally started to feel like things were going in his favor. He remembered the underground room near the entrance to the labs, and was almost certain that the wolf metal would be there. and the tunnels were clear. He had expected the 121s to be out, but apparently no one had messed with the passage mechanism since the accident. They'd split up to search for the lever that worked the passages, and it had been in plain sight, propped up next to the very mechanism that it controlled. Everything would have been perfect, except goddamn Enrico Marini that had wandered along, happening across a very important paper that Wesker had accidentally dropped. His orders, straight from the head of White Umbrella. And then, to complicate matters, Jill had blundered into the tunnels before Wesker could finish taking care of the problem. Wesker sighed inwardly. If it wasn't one thing, it was another. In truth, this whole affair had been a massive headache from the beginning. At least the underground security hadn't been activated, though he had no way of knowing that until they'd reached the tunnels and having dragged Barry along as insurance. He now had to deal with the consequences, if the money wasn't so good. He grinned. Who was he kidding? The money was great. After what felt like years, Barry huffed into the dark room, blindly waving his revolver around. Wesker tensed, waiting for him to walk past the generator's alcove. This part could be tricky. Barry and Enrico had been close. As Barry stormed past the small chamber, Wesker stepped out behind him and jammed the muzzle of the Beretta into Barry's lower back, hard. At the same time, he started talking, low and fast. I know you want to kill me, Barry, but I want you to think about what you're doing. I die, your family dies, and right now it looks like Jill may have to die too, but you can stop it. You can put a stop to the killing. Barry had stopped moving as soon as the gun touched him, but Wesker could hear the barely contained rage in his voice, the pure driving hatred. You killed Enrico, he snarled. Wesker pushed the gun deeper into his back. Yes, but I didn't want to. Enrico found some information he shouldn't have. He knew too much. And if he'd told Jill what he knew about Umbrella, I'd have to kill her too. You're going to kill her anyway. You're going to kill all of us. Wesker sighed, allowing a pleading note to creep into his voice. That's not true. Don't you get it? I just want to get to the laboratory and rid the evidence before anyone finds it. Once that material is destroyed, there's no reason for anyone to get hurt. We can all just walk away. Barry was silent, and Wesker could tell that he wanted to believe him. Wanted to desperately believe that the things could be that simple. Wesker let him waver for a moment before pressing on. All I want you to do is to keep Jill busy. Keep her and anyone else you run into away from the labs, at least for a little while. You'll be saving her life. And I swear to you that as soon as I get what I need, you and your family will never hear from me again. He waited, and when Barry finally spoke, Wesker knew he had him. Where are the labs? Good boy. Wesker lowered the gun, keeping his expression blank just in case Barry had good night vision. He pulled a folded paper out of his vest and slipped it into Barry's hand, a map from the tunnels to the first basement level. If for some reason you can't keep her away, at least go with her. There are a lot of doors with locks on the outside down there. Worst comes to worst, you can lock her up until it's over. I mean it, Barry. No one else has to get hurt. It's all up to you. Barry stepped back quickly, reaching for the lever with the six-sided tip that he left next to the generator. He watched Barry for a few seconds longer, saw the sag in the big man's shoulders, the submissive hang of his head. Satisfied, Wesker turned and walked out of the room. On the very slight chance that any of the stars had made it to the lab, Mr. Burton would ensure that there wouldn't be any more trouble. He hurried back through the entrance tunnel, sighing, congratulating himself on getting things back under control as he headed towards the passage mechanism. He'd have to move fast from here on out. There were a few things he neglected to mention to Barry, like the experimental security detachment that would be released into the tunnels once he turned the lever for the first time. Sorry, Barry, slipped my mind. It would be interesting to see how his team fared with the 121s, the hunters. Watching the stars pit their strength and agility against the creatures would be quite a show, and sadly, one he'd have to miss. It was too bad, really. The hunters had been caged for a long time, and they'd be very, very hungry. Alright. See, we're flying through these chapters now. We're already on chapter 15. Imagine Barry just started telling Chris and Becky that Jill was working with Wesker against him just to cover his back. That'd be hilarious. Papa Barry core. Enrico is not ready for the Wesker drive-by. Yeah, it's sad. Like, it makes me, like, laugh a little bit, because it's like, I always thought about it in, like, the game and stuff when he, like, when he shoots him and then, like, takes off and runs, and it's like, For him to just be gone, like, bro had to, like, put all of his, like, Wesker strength into his sprint. Bro was like, and just fucking took off, like the Ben 10 alien accelerate or something. Like, he just dips. It's crazy. It's like, I can't believe he got away with it. You already know Plant 42 is the goat at domination. Yeah, right? Wesker only hired Enrico to meet a quota, probably. Yeah, probably. Oh, Enrico. What a guy. Alright, that's your next hydration reminder. I just finished my monster, so. Alright. Chapter 15. Barry had been gone for too long. Jill had no idea how extensive the tunnels were, but from what she'd seen, they all looked alike. Barry could be lost trying to find his way back, or he could have found the murderer and without any backup. He might not come back at all. In any case, staying put wasn't going to help anything. She stood up, taking a last look at the Bravo's pale face and silently wishing him peace before walking away. What did he find out that got him killed? Who was it? Enrico had only managed to get out that the traitor was a he, but that didn't exactly narrow things down, except for herself and the rookie. The Raccoon Stars were all male. She could rule out Chris, since he'd been convinced from the start that there was something weird going on. And now Barry, who'd been with her when Marini died. Brad Vickers simply wasn't the type to do anything dangerous, and Joseph and Kenneth were dead, which leaves Richard Aiken, Forrest Speyer, and Albert Wesker. None of them seemed likely, but she had to at least consider the possibility. Enrico was dead, and she no longer doubted that Umbrella had one of the stars in their pocket. When she got to the door, she quickly leaned down and tightened her damp bootlaces, preparing herself. Whoever had shot the Bravo could have just as easily taken her and Barry out, and since he hadn't, she could only figure that he didn't want to kill anyone else, and it wouldn't be looking for more targets. Assuming that he was still in the underground system, she'd have to be as quiet as possible if she wanted to find him. The tunnels were perfect sound conductors, amplifying even the tiniest sound. She eased open the metal door, listening, and then edged out into the dim tunnel, staying close to the wall. In front of her, the corridor was unlit. She opted to head back the way she'd come instead. The darkness was a perfect spot for an ambush. She didn't want to find out she was wrong about the killer's intentions by taking a bullet. A low, grinding rumble reverberated through the heavy stone walls, sounded like something big moving. Jill instinctively used the sound as cover, taking several steps toward reaching the next metal door just as the rumbling stopped. She slipped back out into the tunnel where she'd run into Barry, gently closing the door behind her. What the hell was that? It sounded like an entire wall moving. She shuddered, remembering the descending ceiling in that room in the house. Maybe the tunnels were rigged too. She needed to watch every step. The idea of being crunched to death by some bizarre mechanism underground. Like the one next to that pit with the hexagonal hole? She nodded slowly, deciding that she needed to go take another look at those doors she couldn't get to before. Maybe the killer had the tool it required, and the noise she'd heard had come from him operating it. She could be wrong, but there was no harm in checking. And at least I won't get lost. She reached for the door that would lead her back and stopped her head cocked to catch the strange sound coming from the tunnel behind her. It was a rusty hinge? Some kind of bird, maybe? It was loud, whatever it was. Thump, thump, thump. That sound she knew. Footsteps. Headed in her direction, and it was either Barry or someone built like him. They were heavy, plodding, but too far apart. Deliberate. Get out of here now! Jill grabbed at the metal latch and ran into the next tunnel, no longer caring how much noise she made. Although she sometimes misread them, her instincts were never wrong, and they were telling her that whoever or whatever was making that sound, she didn't want to be there when it showed up. She took several running steps down the stone corridor away from the ladder that led back to the courtyard, and then forced herself to slow down, taking a deep breath. She couldn't just go sprinting ahead either. There were other dangers than the one she'd left behind. Behind her, the door opened. Jill turned, raising her Beretta, and stared in horror at the thing standing there. It was huge, shaped like a man, but the resemblance stopped there. Naked but sexless, its entire muscular body was covered with a pebbled amphibious skin. shaded a dark green. It was hunched over so that its impossibly long arms almost touched the floor, both of its hands and feet tipped with thick, brutal claws. Tiny, light-colored eyes peered out from the flat reptilian skull. It turned its strange gaze toward her, dropped its wide-hinged jaw, and let out a tremendous high-pitched screech like nothing she'd ever heard before, the sound echoing around her, filling her with mortal terror. Jill fired 3 shots that smacked into the creature's chest and sent it reeling backwards. It stumbled, fell against a tunnel wall, and with another terrible shriek, it sprang at her, pushing off the stones with powerful legs, its claws outstretched and grasping. She fired again and again as it flew toward her, the bullets tearing into its puckered flesh, ribbons of dark blood coiling away. And it landed in a heaving crouch only a few feet in front of her, screaming. One massive arm snaking out to swipe at her legs. A musky, moldy animal smell washed over her, and it smelled like dark places in feral rage. Jesus, why won't it die? Jill trained the Beretta on the back of its skull and emptied the clip. Even as the green flesh splattered away and bones splintered, she continued to fire, the hot slugs ripping into the pulpy, pinkish mass of its brain. Click, click, click. No more bullets. She lowered the weapon, her entire body shaking. It was over, the creature was dead, but it had taken almost an entire clip, 15 9mm rounds, the last 7 or 8 at close range. Still staring at the falling monster, she ejected the empty magazine and loaded a fresh clip before holstering the Beretta. She reached back and unstrapped the Remington, taking comfort in the solid, balanced weight of the shotgun. What the hell were you people working on out here? It seemed that Umbrella researchers had invented more than just a virus, something just as deadly, but with claws. And there could be more of them. She never had a more horrifying thought. Holding the Remington close, Jill turned and ran. Chris and Rebecca walked down a long wooden hallway, warily glancing up every other step. There was what looked like dried, dead ivy poking out of every crack and crevice where the walls met the ceiling, a bone-colored growth that had scaled across the planks like a fungus. It looked harmless, but after what Rebecca had read to him about Plant 42, Chris kept himself ready to move quickly. After going through the rest of the papers in the trunk, Rebecca had come up with a report on some kind of herbicide that could apparently be mixed in Point 42 called Vigil. She'd brought it along, though Chris doubted it would be useful. All he wanted was to find the exit, and if they could avoid the killer plant, so much the better. The front hall had been clear of the growth, though Chris wasn't prepared to call it secured. Besides the 2 bedrooms by the front door, there had been a rec room that had been distinctly creepy. Chris had looked inside and immediately felt his internal alarms going off, though he couldn't have known why. There had been no danger that he could see, just a bar and a couple of tables. In spite of seeing the calm, he had closed the door quickly and then they'd moved on. His gut feeling was enough of a reason to leave it alone. They stopped in front of the only door in the long, meandering stretch of the hallway, both of them still glancing nervously at the scaling ivy near the ceiling. Chris pushed at the knob, the door swung open. Warm, humid air flooded out of the shadowy room, thick and tropical, but with a nasty undertone, like the taint of spoiled fruit. Chris instinctively pulled Rebecca behind him as she saw the walls of the chamber. They were completely covered in the same kind of strange, straggling growth that was in the hall, but here, the scaling ivy was lush and bloated, a bibulous verdant green. There was a faint whispering coming from inside the room, the subtle sense of movement, and Chris realized that it was coming from the sickly plant matter itself, the walls quivering in a weird optical illusion as the draping tendrils crept and grew. Rebecca started to step past him, and Chris pushed her back. "What are you, nuts? I thought you said this thing sucks blood." She shook her head, staring at the whispering walls. "That's not Plant 42. At least not the part of the report talked about. Plant 42 is going to be a lot bigger and a lot more mobile. I never did much with phytobiology, but according to that study, we'll be looking for an angiosperm with motile foliage." She smiled a quick, nervous smile. "Sorry, think it was a great plant bulb with 10 to 20-foot vines waving around it." Chris grimaced. "Great, thanks for putting my mind at rest." They edged the large room, careful not to walk too closely to the hissing walls. There were 3 doors besides the one they came through, one directly across from the entrance, and the other 2 facing each other to their left, where the room opened up. Chris led them towards the door opposite the entrance, figuring it was most likely to lead out to the bunkhouse. The door was unlocked, and Chris started to push it open. Bam! The door slammed shut, causing both of them to jump back, weapons raised. A series of heavy sliding thumps followed, like someone on the other side was kicking at the walls, except the sounds were everywhere, above and below the door's sturdy frame, beating against every corner of the sealed room. "Lot of vines, you said?" Chris asked. Rebecca nodded. "I think we just found Plant 42. They listened for a moment, Chris thinking about the kind of strength and weight it would take to slam the door so solidly. No kidding, bigger and more mobile. We may be blocking the only exit to this place. Terrific. They backed away, turning the open area and looking at the other two doors. The one on their right had the number 002 above it. Chris fished out the keys he'd found and flipped through them, finding the one with the matching number. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, Rebecca behind him. There was a smaller door to the left that opened to a bathroom, quiet and dusty. The room itself was another bedroom. A bunk, a desk, a couple of shelves, nothing of interest. There was another series of dull thumps from behind the far wall as they quickly moved back into the humid, whispering room. Chris fighting a growing certainty that they were going to have to deal with the plant if they wanted to get out. Not necessarily, there could still be another way. The things that had been going so far, he didn't think so. From the shuffling zombies lurking in the main house to the run through the courtyard, snakes dropping from the trees, every part of the Spencer estate seemed to be designed to keep them from leaving. Chris shook the negative thoughts aside as they approached the shadowy chamber's final door, but they came rushing back at the sight of the small green keypad set next to the frame. He rattled the knob, but there was no give. It was another dead end. "Security lock," he said, sighing. "No way to get in without a code." Rebecca frowned down at the pattern of the tiny red lights set above the numbered buttons. We could just try the numbers until we run across the right combination." Chris shook his head. "You know that our chances are of just stumbling across the right..." He stopped, staring at her, and then fumbled the keyring out of his pocket. "Try 345, he said, watching eagerly as Rebecca dutifully punched in the number. "Come on, Mr. Alias, don't fail us now." The pattern of red lights flashed and then blinked out one by one. As the last tiny light faded, there was a click from inside the door. Chris grinned, pushing the door open, and felt his hope dwindle as he glanced across the tiny room. Dusty shelves filled with tiny glass bottles and a rust-stained sink. Not the exit he'd expected. No, that would have been too easy. God knows we can't have that. Rebecca walked quickly to one of the shelves and looked over the glass bottles, mumbling to herself. Isoscamine, anhydrine, deladrin. She turned back to him, grinning widely. "Chris, we can kill the plant. That Vigil, the phototoxin. I can make it here. If we can get to the basement, I can find the plant's root." Chris smiled back. "And then we can destroy it without having to fight the damn thing. Rebecca, you're brilliant. How long do you need?" 10-15 minutes. "You got it. Stay here. I'll be back as soon as I can." Rebecca was already pulling down the bottles as Chris closed the door and jogged back towards the corridor, past the whispering halls of the shadowy green. They were going to beat this place, and once they got out, Umbrella was going down hard. Barry was standing over Enrico's cold, dead body, Wesker map crumpled in one hand. Jill had been gone, and he'd returned. Rather than look for her, he'd found himself unable to move, to even tear his gaze away from the corpse of his murdered friend. "It's all my fault. If I hadn't helped Wesker get out of the house, you'd still be alive." Barry stared miserably at Enrico's face, so filled with guilt and shame that he didn't know what to do anymore. He knew he had to find Jill and keep her from getting to Wesker, keep his family from being hurt. But still, he couldn't seem to force himself to walk away. What he wanted more than anything was to be able to explain himself to Enrico, make him understand how things had come to be the way they were. "He's got Kathy and the babies, Rico. What else could I have done? What else can I do but follow his orders?" The Bravo stared back at him with glazed, unseeing eyes. No accusation, no acceptance, no nothing. Forever. Even if Barry continued to help the captain and everything else turned out the way it was supposed to, Rico Marini would still be dead, and Barry didn't know how he was going to live with the knowledge that he was responsible. Shots echoed through the tunnels, a lot of them. "Jill!" Barry's head snapped around. He reached for his weapon automatically, the sound spurring him to the action as anger flushed through his system. There could only be one explanation. Wesker had found Jill. Barry turned and ran, sick at the thought of another Star's member dead by Wesker's treacherous hand, furious with himself for believing the captain's lies. The door in front of him slammed open, and Barry stopped dead in his tracks, all thoughts of Wesker and Jill and Enrico wiped away by the sight of the crouching thing in front of him. His mind couldn't grasp what he saw, his stunned gaze feeding him bits of information that he didn't make sense. Green skin, piercing orange-white eyes, talons. It screamed, a horrible squealing cry, and Barry didn't think anymore. He squeezed the trigger, and the shriek turned into a bubbling, choking gasp as the heavy round tore into its throat and knocked it down. The thing flailed its limbs wildly as blood spurted from the smoking hole. Barry heard several sharp cracks like breaking bones, saw more blood pour from its fist as long, thick claws snapped off against rock. Barry stared in mute astonishment as the creature continued to spasm violently, burbling through the ragged hole in its throat as if trying to scream. The shot should have blown its head clean off its neck, but it was another full minute before it died, its frenzied thrashings gradually weakening as blood continued to pump out at a tremendous rate. Finally, it stopped moving, and from the dark, noxious lake that it had created, Barry realized that it had bled to death, conscious until the end. What did I just kill? What the fuck? From outside the tunnel, another shrieking howl resounded through the clammy air. It was joined by a second and then third. The animal cries rose up, furious and unnatural, the screams of creatures that shouldn't exist. Barry dug into his hip pack with shaking hands and pulled out more rounds for the Colt, praying to God that he had enough, and that those shots he heard before hadn't been Jill's last stand. Alright, and that's chapter 15. Irons was so mad there was another mustache geyser on RPD, so he made Wesker hire Enrico. Of course, it's not Chris because he's the most attractive member of Stars. Duh. Oh yeah, V-Jolt time. That's right. I missed the pee break, but we hydrated. I didn't take a pee break because I didn't need to pee. But, yes, we did hydrate. And we are going to continue to hydrate. One shot against the hunter, just bury things. Well, yeah, he's got a magnum. I bet he's blowing their head off or something. Well, I guess it did it and bled to death. But you know what I mean. Of course he did. He's like... He's Colt Python. Just... Yeah. Bro's blasting. Yeah, we're definitely going to finish this today because we've already read more than we have left. And it's only 8:24, so... Yeah, for sure. Hunter was hurting from the burn. Hurting from the burn is crazy. Hurting from the burn. Jesus Christ. Barry used that burst magnum on him. That's what it was. He's like... Imagine though. Oh, that's great. Oh. Yeah, I'm greatly enjoying this though. It's nice. Somehow a mosquito got in here. I don't want it to bite me. Anyway. We are on chapter 16 now. I'm gonna get another drink of water before I start. My throat's kind of hurting. I might have to get some more water in a little bit. I'm like, there's like nothing left in here. Look at me go hydrating. Gotta make up for the monster somehow. Alright. Chapter 16. It could have once been a Charlotte, if Charlottes ever got to be the size of cattle. From the thick layer of white web that covered the room, floor to ceiling, it couldn't have been anything else. Jill stared down at the curled, bristling legs of the abomination, her skin crawling. The creature that had attacked her by the courtyard entrance had been terrifying, but so alien that she hadn't been able to relate it to anything. Charlotte's, on the other hand. She already hated them, hated their dark, bustling bodies and skittering legs. This one had been the mother of all of them, and even dead it frightened her. Hasn't been dead long, though. She forced herself to look at it, at the slick puddles of greenish ichor that dropped from the holes in its rounded, hairy body. It had been shot several times, and from the noxious ooze that seeped from the wounds, she guessed that it had still been alive and crawling not 20 minutes ago, maybe less. She shuddered and stepped away towards the double metal doors that led out of the web chamber. Whispering streams of sticky stuff clung to her boots, making it a struggle to move. She took careful, deliberate steps, determined not to fall. The thought of being covered in charlotte web, having to cling to her entire body, she shuddered again, swallowing thickly. Think about something else, anything. At least she knew she was on the right track, and close behind whoever had triggered the tunnel mechanism. Neat trick, that. When she'd reached the area where the pit had been, she thought that maybe she'd gotten lost after all. The gaping hole had been gone, smooth stone in its place. Looking up, she'd seen the ragged edges of the pit suspended overhead. The entire center section of the tunnel that had been flipped over, turned like a giant wheel by some miracle of engineering. The doors that led to another straight, empty tunnel. A giant boulder stood at one end, and past that, the room she was about to leave. Jill grabbed the handle of the doors and pushed it open, stumbling into yet another gloomy passage. She leaned back against the door and breathed deeply, barely resisting the urge to brush wildly at her clothes. I can blow away zombies and monsters, the best of them. Show me a Charlotte and I lose my freaking mind. The short, empty tunnel that ran in front of her, a door at either end, but the door to her left was set into the same wall as she just exited, leading back towards the courtyard. Jill opted for the one on the right, hoping that her sense of direction was still intact. The metal door creaked open and she stepped in, feeling the change in the air immediately. The tunnel split in front of her. To the right, a thickening shadow where the rock walls opened into another corridor, but to her left was a small elevator shaft like the ones in the courtyard. A warm, delicious wind swept down and over her, a sweet air like a forgotten dream. Jill grinned and started for the shaft, seeing that the lift's platform had been taken up. Chances were good that she was on the trail of Enrico's killer. But maybe not. Maybe he went the other way, and you're about to lose him. Sorry. I felt that coming too. Water straight S tier. Yeah, for real. Bless you. Thank you, Tom. Ugh. I was just trying so hard not to sneeze on the book. Jill hesitated, gazing wistfully at the small shaft, and then turned around sighing. She had to at least take a look. She walked in the stone corridor that stretched in front of her, the temperature immediately dropping back to the now familiar, unpleasant chill. The tunnel extended several feet to her right and dead-ended. To her left, a massive rounded boulder like one she'd seen before marked at the other end, a good 100 feet away, and there was something small laying in front of it. Something blue? Frowning, Jill walked towards the giant rock, trying to make out the blue object. Halfway down the dim tunnel was an offshoot to the left, and she recognized the metal plate next to it as the same kind of mechanism that had moved the pit. She stepped into the small offshoot, examining the worn stones at its opening. There was a small door to her right, and Jill realized that the passage and room could be hidden by way of the mechanism. The walls turned to block the entrance. Geez, it must have taken them years to set all this up, and to think I was impressed with the house. She opened the door and looked inside, a mid-sized square room of rough stone, a statue of a bird on the pedestal, the only decoration. There was no other exit, and Jill felt a sudden rush of relief as the implications sank in. She could leave the underground tunnels. The killer had to have left already. Smiling, she stepped back out into the corridor and started towards the giant rock, still curious about the blue thing. As she got closer, she saw that it was a book, bound in blue dyed leather. It had been thrown carelessly against the base of the stone, laying face down and open. She slung the Remington across her back and crouched down to pick it up. It was a book box. Her father had told her about them, though she'd never actually seen one. There was a cutaway section of the pages, behind the cover where valuables could be hidden, though this one was empty. She flipped it and closed, tracing the golden leaf letters of the title. Eagle of East, Wolf of West. As she started back towards the elevator, it didn't sound much of a thriller, though it was nicely bound. Snick. Jill froze as the stone beneath her left foot sank down a tiny bit, and she realized at the same instant that the entire tunnel gently sloped away from where she was standing. Oh no! Behind her, a deep thundering sound of rock grating against rock. Dropping the book, Jill sprinted for cover, arms and legs pumping as the grumbling grew louder and louder, the tripped boulder picking up momentum. The dark opening in the offshoot seemed miles away. Won't make it, gonna die? And she could almost feel the tons of stone bearing down on her. Wanted desperately to look, but knew that the split-second difference would kill her. In a final desperate burst of speed, she dove for the opening, crashing to the floor and jerking her legs in, as a massive rock rolled past, missing her by inches. Even as she drew in her next gasping breath, the boulder hit the end of the tunnel with an explosive, bone-jarring crunch that shook the underground passage. For a moment, it was all she could do to huddle against the cold floor and not throw up. When that passed, she slowly got to her feet and dusted herself off. The heels of her hands were abraded by both her knees bruised from running dive, but compared to being smashed flat by a big rock, she thought she had definitely made the right choice. Jill unstrapped the Remington and headed for the elevator shaft, very much looking forward to leaving the underground behind, and keeping her fingers crossed that whatever came next, it wouldn't be cold. Oh, and that there wouldn't be any Charlottes. The basement was flooded, all right. Chris stood at the top of a short ramp that led to the basement doors, staring down at his own unsmiling face reflected off the shimmering water. It looked cold and deep. After he left Rebecca, he continued down in the hall and found room 003 at the end. The ladder to the basement level tucked discreetly behind a bookcase in the neatly kept bedroom. He descended into a chilled concrete corridor with buzzing fluorescent lights overhead, a dramatic change from the plain wood and the simple style of the bunkhouse above. At least I found the basement. It appeared that killing Plant 42 was their only option for escape after all. He seen no other exit from the bunkhouse, which meant that there had to be past the plant's room, or else there was no way back to the door. A thought that left him distinctly unsettled. It didn't seem possible, but then neither did a carnivorous plant. You won't find out until you get this over with. Chris sighed and stepped into the water. It was cold and had an unpleasant chemical smell. He waded down the door, the water sliding up over his knees and finally slopping at mid-thigh, sloshing gently. Shivering, he pushed the door open and moved inside. The basement is dominated by a giant glass-fronted tank in the center of the room that extended floor to ceiling. A large, jagged hole towards the bottom, right-hand side. Chris wasn't good at judging volume, but to fill the whole area with water, he figured the tank had to have held several thousands of gallons. What the hell were they studying that needed that much? Tidal waves? It didn't matter. He was cold and he wanted to find what he needed to find and get back to dry land. He started off towards the left, slowly straining against the push and pull of the gently lapping waves. It was totally unreal, wading through a well-lit concrete room, though he'd supposed it was no stranger than anything else he'd experienced since the Alpha copter had set down. Everything about the Spencer estate had a dreamlike feel to it, as if it existed in its own reality far removed from the rest of the world's. Try nightmare-like. Killer plants, giant snakes, The Walking Dead. All it's missing is a flying saucer, maybe a dinosaur. He heard a soft sloshing behind him and glanced over his shoulder to see a thick, triangular fin rise up from the water 20 feet away and slide toward him, a wavering gray shadow beneath. Panic shot through him, an all-encompassing panic that seared away from rational thought. He took a giant running step and realized he couldn't run as he plunged face first into the cold chemical water and came up gasping, spluttering tainted liquid from his nose and mouth, hoping to God Rebecca was right about the virus having burned itself out. He whipped his head around, eyes burning, searching for the fin, and saw that it halved the distance between them. He could see it now, a shark, its rippling, distorted body sliding easily through the water, 10 or 12 feet long, its broad tail lashing it forward, the black soulless eyes set above its pointed grin. Wet bullets misfire. Chris stumbled away backwards, knowing that he didn't stand a chance of outrunning it. Wheeling his arms for balance, he sloshed heavily through the dragging water, turning himself sideways and managing a few more steps before the shark was on top of him. And he leaped to the side, dodging the animal and slapping the water as violently as he could, churning it into foaming waves. The shark slid past them, its smooth, heavy body brushing against his leg. As soon as it was past, Chris stumbled after it, splashing wildly to keep it up as he turned the corner in a flooded room. He could stay close enough, but it wouldn't be able to turn to get at him. Except that in seconds the shark would have room to maneuver, and he could see the two-door head on the left, but the giant fish was already leaving him behind, heading toward the next corner to turn around and come back for him. Chris took a deep breath and plunged into the water, knowing it was crazy, but that he didn't have a better chance. He strode desperately toward the first door, kicking off against the cement floor to propel himself forward in great bounding leaps. He hit the door just as the shark was turning up ahead and grabbed for the handle, choking, and it was locked. Shit, shit, shit. Chris jammed his hand into his wet vest and came up with Alias's keys, fumbling through them as the fin glided closer, the wide-pointed grin opening. He shoved a key into the lock and the last key on the ring that he hadn't found the room for, and slammed his shoulder against the door at the same time, the shark now only a few feet away. The door flew open and Chris stumbled in, falling and kicking frantically. His boot connected solidly with the shark's fleshy snout, deflecting it from the opening. In a flash, he was on his feet. He threw his weight into the door, and with a slap of water, it was closed. He sagged against the door, wiping at his stinging eyes in the back of his hand. The lapping water settled gently into the smaller and smaller ripples as he caught his breath and his vision cleared. For now, he was safe. He unholstered his Beretta and ejected the dripping magazine, wondering how the hell he was going to make it back upstairs. Looking around the small room, he saw nothing he could use as a weapon. One wall was lined with buttons and switches, and he trudged over to look at them, drawn to a blinking red light in the far corner. Looks like I found a control room. Aces? Maybe I can turn off the light and get the shark to go to sleep. There was a lever set next to the flashing light, and Chris stared down at the faded tape beneath it, feeling a numb disbelief as he read the printed letters. Emergency drainage system. You gotta be kidding me. Why didn't anyone pull this thing the second the tank broke? The answer occurred to him even as he thought it. The people who worked here were scientists. No way they were going to turn down the opportunity to study their precious Plant 42, sucking up water from the man-made lake. Chris grabbed the lever and pushed it down. There was a sliding metallic noise outside the door, and immediately the water level started to drop. Within a minute, the last of it had flowed out from under the door, and a gurgling liquid gasp came from the direction of the broken tank. He walked back to the door, opening it carefully, and he heard the frantic wet thumps of a very big fish trying to swim through air. Chris grinned, thinking that he should probably feel pity for the helpless creature, and hoping instead that it died a long, agonizing death. "Bite me," he whispered. Wesker had shot 4 of the shuffling, gasping umbrella workers on his way to the computer room on level 3. He hadn't recognized any of them, though he was pretty sure that the second one he'd taken out had been Steve Keller, one of the guys from Special Research. Steve always wore penny loafers, and the pallid, dried-up husk that he'd reached for him by the stairs had been wearing Steve's brand. It appeared that the effects of the viral spill had been harsher in the labs, less messy, but no less disquieting. The creatures that roamed the halls outside seemed to have been totally dehydrated, their limbs withered and stringy, their eyes like a shriveled grapes. Wesker had dodged several of them, but the ones he seemed forced to put down had scarcely bled at all. He sat at the computer in the cool, stale room and waited for the system to boot up, feeling truly on top of things for the first time all day. He'd had earlier moments, of course, the way he'd handled Barry, finding the wolf metal in the tunnels, even shooting Ellen Smith in the face and gave him a momentary sense of accomplishment. A feeling that he was in control of what was happening. But so much had gone wrong along the way that he hadn't had time to enjoy any of his success. But now I'm here. If the stars are already dead, they will be soon, assuming I don't suffer with some massive lapse of skill. I'll be out here within half an hour, mission complete. There were still dangers, but Wesker could handle them. The mesh monkeys, the MA2s, were undoubtedly loose in the power room, but they were easy enough to get past as long as you didn't stop running. He should know, he'd helped come up with a design. And there was the big man, the tyrant, waiting one level down in the glass shell, sleeping from the sweet, dreamless sleep of the damned, from which he'll never surely wake. What a waste. So much power, crossed off as a failure by the boys at White. A gentle musical tone informed him that the system was ready. Wesker pulled a notebook out of his vest and opened it to the list of codes, although he already knew them. John Howe had set up the system months ago, using his name and the name of his girlfriend Ada as access keys. Wesker tapped out the first of the passwords that would allow him to unlock the laboratory doors, feeling a sudden, vague wistfulness for the excitement of the day. It would be over so soon, and there would be no one to witness his achievements, to share his fond memories after the fact. Now that he thought about it, it was a shame that none of the stars would be joining him. Only thing better than a grand finale was a grand finale with an audience. So that was an interesting chapter. A lot happened. Chris confronted Neptune. Jill found the remains of Black Tiger that Wesker had taken out. Um, I figured out what room Plant 42 was in. So like, that was a crazy chapter. All kinds of stuff happened. Jill's expert deduction skills. The traitor's probably not Enrico or me. Right? I swear, like she's trying to give herself so much credit, but she's just Jill at the end of the day. Ain't no way she escaped the X plus C boulder. Yeah, that was crazy. She did it. She got past. She dove past it. All right, Jill. All right. You're lucky this time. Dang, Chris. Wesker revealing his own success is baller. I agree. That is pretty baller. Ugh. It was cool. Alright. I'm gonna get some more water because I'm out. So I will be right back. Okay. We are back. Yeah, we're definitely finishing this book tonight. I'm excited. I knew it was only going to be like 3 readings. There's no way it was going to be any more than that. Chapter 17. Jill had taken the elevator into what seemed like to be another part of the garden or courtyard, although the area had been isolated, surrounded by trees. She guessed as much from the few overgrown potted plants and the wholesome sounds of the forest beyond the low metal railing. There had been nothing to see but a rusting door set in a nondescript overgrown wall, welded shut, and a large open well, like a stone wading pool. Inside had been a short spiral staircase leading down to another small elevator, which I took, but now where the hell am I? The room that the elevator had led to was unlike any other part of the estate she'd seen. It lacked the strange fetid charm of the mansion or the dripping gloom of the underground. It was as though she'd walked out into a gothic horror story and into a military complex, a utilitarian's bleak paradise. She was standing in a large steel-reinforced concrete room, the walls painted a muddy industrial orange. Metal ducts and overhead pipes lined the upper walls, and the room was rather aptly titled XDRB1. Painted across the concrete in black several feet high. Any sense she'd have of where she was in relation to the estate was totally gone. It's as cold as everywhere else. At least I know I'm still on the ground. There was a heavy metal door on one side of the room, firmly locked. The sign to the left of it stated that it was only to be opened in case of a first-class emergency. She figured that the B1 on the wall stood for basement level 1, her theory confirmed by the bolted ladder that led down through a narrow shaft in the concrete. Where there was B1, B2 naturally followed. And considering the alternative, it looks like that's where I'm headed. My other option is to go back through the underground tunnels. She peered down at the ladder shaft, only able to see a square of concrete at the bottom. Sighing, she held onto the Remington and started down. As soon as she hit the last rung, it turned anxiously and faced a much smaller room, as bland and industrial as the first. Inset fluorescent lights on the ceiling, a gray metal door, concrete walls, and floor. She walked through quickly, starting to feel hopeful that there was no more creatures or traps. So far, the basement levels had offered nothing more than a dangerous lack of decorum. She opened the door and her hope faded as the dry, dusty smell of the long dead flesh hit her. She stepped out into a cement walkway that led over a flight of descending stairs, a metal railing circling the path. At the top of the steps was a crumpled zombie, so emaciated and shriveled that it appeared mummified. She held the shotgun ready and walked slowly toward the stairs, noting that there was a hall branching off to the left where the railing stopped. She darted a quick look around the corner and saw that it was clear. Still watching the desiccated corpse carefully, she edged down toward the short corridor and stopped at the door on her left. The sign next to the door read, Visual Data Room, and the door itself was unlocked. It opened up into a still gray room with a long meeting table in the center, a slide projector set up in front of a portable screen at the far end. There was a phone on the small stand pushed up against the right wall, and Jill hurried over, knowing that it was too much hope for having to check just the same. It wasn't a phone at all, but an intercom system that didn't seem to work. Sighing, she stepped past an ornamental pillar and walked towards the table, glancing at the empty slide projector. She let her gaze wander, looking for anything of interest, and it stopped on a flat, featureless square of metal set into the wall, about the size of a sheet of paper. Jill stepped over it to take a closer look. There was a flat bar on top. She touched it lightly, and the panel slid down into the wall, revealing a large red button. She looked around the quiet room, trying to imagine what the trap would be, and then realized that there wouldn't be a trap at all. The mansion, the tunnels, all of it was rigged to keep people from getting here, to the basement levels. They're way too efficiently dull to be anything but. Picked up the metal key, the top of it imprinted with a tiny lightning bolt. Slipping it into her pocket, she flipped through a few of the files. They were all stamped with an umbrella logo, and although most of them were too thick and ponderous to spend time sorting through, the title on one of the reports told her what she needed to know, and what she'd already suspected. Umbrella, Bioweapons Report, Research and Development. Nodding slowly, Jill put the file back. She finally found the real research facilities, and she knew that the Stars Trader would be somewhere in these rooms. She was going to have to be very careful. With a final glance around her, Jill decided to go see if she could find the lock that the key belonged to. It was time to place the last few pieces of the puzzle that Umbrella had set up and the Stars had sacrificed themselves trying to solve. The twisted, gnarled root of Plant 42 took up a large corner of the basement room, the bulk of it hanging down in slender, fleshy tendrils that almost touched the floor. A few of the tiny, worm-like threads squirmed blindly around each other, twisting slowly back and forth as if looking for the water supply that Chris had drained. "God, that's disgusting," Rebecca said. Chris nodded in agreement. Besides the control room he'd escaped into, there had only been 2 other chambers in the basement. One of them had been stacked with boxes and cartridges for all kinds of weapons, and although most of them had been uselessly wet, he'd found most of the box of 9mm rounds on a high shelf, saving them both from running out of ammunition. The other room had been plain, containing only a wood table, a bench, and the massive creeping root of the carnivorous plant that lived upstairs. "Yeah," Chris said, "so how do we use this?" Rebecca held up a small bottle of purplish fluid and swirled it gently, still staring at the moving tendrils. "Well, you stand back and don't breathe too deeply. This stuff's got a couple of toxins in it that neither of us want to be ingesting, and it'll turn gaseous once it hits the infected cells." Chris nodded. How will we know it's working?" Rebecca grinned. "If the V-Jolt report is on the mark, we'll know. Watch." She uncapped the bottle and stepped closer to the twisted root, then upended the glass vial, dousing the snaking tendrils in the watery fluid. Immediately, a billow of reddish smoke plumped up from the root as Rebecca emptied the bottle and stepped away quickly. There was a hissing, crackling sound like wet wood thrown atop a blazing fire, and within seconds the feebly twisting fibers started to break, pieces of them snapping off and flaking away. The knotted thickness at the center started to tighten and shrink, pulling into itself. Chris watched in amazement as the giant, terrible root suddenly shriveled up into a dripping ball of mush no bigger than a child's ball and hung there, dead. The entire process had taken about 15 seconds. Rebecca nodded toward the door and both of them stepped out into the drying basement, Chris shaking his head. "God, what'd you put in there?" "Trust me, you don't want to know. You ready to get out of here?" Chris grinned. "Let's do it." They both jogged toward the basement doors, hurrying out into the cold corridor and back toward the ladder that led upstairs. Chris was already going over escape plans for when they left the bunkhouse. It would really depend on where the exit led, but if they ended up in the woods, he was thinking that they should head towards the closest road and light a fire, and then wait for help to come. Though maybe we'll get lucky, run across the damn parking lot for this place. We can hotwire a car and drive out, and get Irons to do something useful for a change, like call in reinforcements. They reached the wood corridor and headed for the plant room, both of them taking long, easy strides past the hissing green walls and finally stopping at the room that held Plant 42. Breathing deeply, Chris nodded to Rebecca. They both unholstered their weapons and Chris pushed the door open, eager to see what lay beyond the experimental plant. They stepped into a huge open room, the smell of rotting vegetation thick in damp air. Whatever it had looked like before, the monster that had been Plant 42 was now a massive steaming lake of dark purple goo in the center of the room. Bloated dead vines the size of fire hoses draped limply across the floor, extending out from the livid, gelid mass. Chris scanned for the next door and saw a plain fireplace against one wall, a broken chair in a corner, and a single door that apparently led back into a bedroom he'd searched earlier. A hidden passage that he'd missed that led to the very room in which they stood. Must have been behind the bookcase. There was no way out. Killing the plant had been a waste of time. It hadn't been blocking anything. Rebecca looked as disappointed as he felt. Her shoulders slumped and expression grim as she studied the bare walls. I'm sorry, Rebecca." They both walked slowly around the room, Chris staring at the dead plant, trying to decide what to do next. Rebecca walked to the fireplace and crouched down next to it, poking at the blackened ash. He wouldn't drag her back to the mansion, neither. Neither of them were up for it. Even with the extra ammo, there were too many snakes. They could wait in the courtyard for Brad to fly by again. Hope he got into range. "Chris, I found something." He turned and saw her pull a couple of pieces of paper out of the ashes, the edges scorched but both sheets otherwise intact. He walked across the room and leaned down to read over her shoulder, and felt his heart pounding as the first word sank in. Security protocols. Basement level 1. Heliport. For executive use only, this restriction may not apply in the event of an emergency. Unauthorized persons entering the heliport will be shot on sight. Elevator. The elevator stops during emergencies. Basement level 2. The visual data room. For use by the Special Research Division only. All other access to the visual data room must be cleared with Keith Irving, room manager. Basement level 3. Prison/Sanitation Division controls the use of the prison. At least one consultant researcher, E. Smith, S. Ross, A. Wesker, must be present if viral use is authorized. Power room. Access limited to headquarters supervisors. This restriction may not apply to consultant researchers with special authorization. Basement level 4. regarding the progress of Tyrant after use of T-Virus. The rest of the paper was burned, the words lost. A. Wesker, Chris said softly. Captain Albert Goddamn Wesker. Barry had said that Wesker disappeared right after the Alphas made it to the house, and it was Wesker who led us here in the first place when the dogs attacked. Cool, competent, unreadable Wesker, working for Umbrella. Rebecca flipped to the second page and Chris leaned in, studying the neatly typed labels beneath the drawn boxes and lines. Mansion, courtyard, guardhouse, underground, laboratories. There was even a compass drawn next to the sketch of the mansion to show them what they'd missed. A secret entrance to the underground hidden behind the waterfall. Rebecca stood up, eyes wide and uncertain. Captain Wesker is involved in all this? Chris nodded slowly. And if he's still here, he's down in the labs, maybe with the rest of the team. If Umbrella sent him here, God only knows what he's up to. And they had to find him, to warn whoever was left of the stars that Wesker had betrayed them all. Ooh, it's getting intense. Everything was done. Wesker stepped into the elevator that led back to level 3, running through his checklist as he lowered the outer gate and slid the inner one closed. Samples collected, disks erased, power reconnected, Tyrant support off. It was really too bad about the Tyrant. Ugly as it was, the thing was a marvel of surgical, chemical, and genetic engineering, and he'd stood in front of its glass chamber for a long time, studying it in silent awe before reluctantly shutting down its life support. As the stasis fluids had drained, he found himself imagining what it had been like to see it in action once the researchers had completed their work. It would have been the ultimate soldier, a thing of beauty in the battlefield, and now it had to be destroyed, all because some idiot tech had hit the wrong button. A mistake that had cost Umbrella millions of dollars and killed the researchers who had created it. He hit the switch and the elevator thrummed to life, carrying him back up for his final task, activating the triggering system at the back of the power room. He'd give himself 15 minutes to make sure he was clear of the blast radius, climbed down to the heliport ladder, hit the back road towards town, and boom, no more hidden Umbrella facility, at least not in Raccoon Forest. Once he got back into the city, he'd pack a bag and head for Umbrella's private airstrip. He could make the necessary calls from there, let his contacts in the White Office know what had happened. They'd have to clean up teams standing by to comb through the forest and take out the surviving specimens, and they'd be most eager to get their hands on the tissue samples he'd taken, 2 of everything except for the Tyrant. With the Tyrant scientists all dead, Umbrella had decided to shelve the project indefinitely. Wesker thought it was a mistake, but then he wasn't getting paid to think. As the elevator slid to a stop, Wesker opened the gates and stepped out, setting on the sample case. He unholstered his Beretta, going over the twisting layout of the power room in his mind. He had to make another run through the MA2s to get to the activation system. He'd already managed to once hook up the elevator circuit, but he had been more active than he expected. Instead of weakening them, the hunger had driven them to new heights of viciousness. He'd been lucky to make it through it unscathed. At a hydraulic hum from down the hall, Wesker froze. Footsteps clattered across the cement floor, hesitated, and then started for the power room at the opposite end of the corridor. Wesker eased up into the corner and looked down at the hall, just in time to see Jill Valentine disappear through the metal doors, a burst of hissing mechanisms echoing through the corridor before they closed. How did she make it through the hunters? Jesus! Apparently he'd underestimated her, and she'd been alone too. If she was that good, the MA2s might not kill her, and she had expectively just blocked him from the triggering system. He wouldn't be able to deal with the creatures that roamed the maze-like walkways and put a stop to her prying. Frustrated, Wesker scooped up the sample case and walked quickly down the hall, back towards the hydraulic doors that led to the main corridor of level 3. If she made it back out, he'd have to just shoot her. It would only delay his escape by a few minutes. Still, it was an unexpected curve, and as far as he was concerned, it was too late in the game for surprises. Surprises pissed him off, and they made him feel like he wasn't in control. I am in control. Nothing is happening here I can't handle. This is my game, my rules, and I will accomplish my mission without any interference from a little thief bitch. Wesker stalked out into the main corridor and saw that Jill had managed to take out a few more of the wizened, withered scientists and technicians that wandered the basement labs. 2 of them lay just outside the door, their skulls blown into arid powder that what looked like shotgun blasts. He kicked one of them angrily, his boot crunching into the corpse's brittle ribs, the dry snap of bone loud in the silence. Except that suddenly, he heard heavy boots coming down the metal stairs from B2, the hollow clump echoing through the hall, and then a rough, hesitant voice calling out, Drill? Barry Burton, as I live and breathe. Wesker raised his weapon coolly, ready to fire when Barry stepped into view, and then lowered it thoughtfully. After a moment, a slow grin spread across his face. Ooh. Alright. Fast-acting Vigil works every time. Yeah, I know, right? It was really fast. And, like, it was kind of funny to me that it actually killed it instead of, like, just weakening it. Interesting little detail. Hey, long time no see. I miss you, Sabrina. Hey, Machete, how's it going? Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you, as always. Oh, dang, they just busted Wesker. Yeah, for real. MA121s are lost. Impossible. Oh, no, they lost. Impossible. Yeah, I know, right? Hi. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm reading the Umbrella Conspiracy book. I'm like stopping in between chapters to like read comments and stuff like that, so. You have not streamed? I have streamed. There was only 1 week that I took off because my internet was out. But I've been, and I even did a Dino Crisis stream that week too, as a surprise. So I have been streaming. I streamed yesterday too. How did Wesker not burst out laughing at Barry's little chill? Yeah, I know, right? Have I played Silent Hill 1? No, I haven't. I wasn't really a fan of Silent Hill myself. That deserves a remake. They are remaking it. It comes out like either later this year or next year, I think. But yeah, they announced they're remaking it as well. So, you'll be excited to know that. It's coming out soon. You don't have to wait much longer, Machete. Alright. Let's see, it's 9:04. Alright. I miss playing it since 1999 using my PS1. Yeah. We only got that much of the book left. We're almost there. Wesker acting very superior, yet he dropped his orders in the cave for Enrico. I know, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, I do find it interesting though that he like he's like upset that he lost control. Like, it seems like a very Wesker thing to do, to like want to have control of a situation like that. Like, it seems like something psychologically that he would do. So I like that. I like that they wrote Wesker like that. Alright. We'll get back into it. Chapter 18. Jill eased into the steaming, hissing room, a thick smell of grease in the heated air. It was some kind of boiler room, in a big one. Heavy, thrumming machinery filled the large chamber, surrounded by winding catwalks. Massive turbines spun and pounded, generating power in a steady whine as hidden ducts spat out steam in short intervals. She moved slowly into the poorly lit chamber, peering down one of the railed walkways into the fluctuating shadows cast by the towering generators. From where she was, she could see that the place was a labyrinth of paths, twinning around the giant blocks of noisy machinery. The source of the estate's power. That explains how they managed to keep it secret for so long. They had their own little city out here, totally anonymous. Probably had their food shipped in, too. She turned down the narrow walk to her right, watching uneasily for any more of the strange pale zombies that she'd seen in the corridors of B3. The path seemed clear, but with the movement and noise created by the turbines, something ripped at her left shoulder, a sudden violent slash that tore open her vest and scraped the skin beneath. Jill spun and fired, the roar of the shotgun drowning out the hissing machines. The blast hit metal, pellets ricocheting into the empty walk. There was nothing behind her. Where? A lunging blade-like claw sliced in the air in front of her face, swooping down from above. She stumbled back, staring up at the steel mesh of the ceiling, and saw a dark shape skitter out of the shadows, hooking its way across the grate incredibly fast, curving claws at its hands and feet. She caught a glimpse of the thick spines around its mutant, flattened face, and then turned and ran into the thrumming shadows of the power room. There was a door at the end of the walk, and Jill sprinted toward it, heart racing, the pounding whine of the generators thundering in her ears. She was 5 feet from the door when she saw the moving shadow position itself in front of her. She raised the shotgun and leaned back. More of them! There were 2 of the creatures overhead, squat, terrible things with vicious, curving hooks instead of hands. One of them dropped down suddenly, hanging by clawed feet to swipe at her with its bladed arm. Jill fired, and the creature screeched, the blast hitting it in the chest. It fell from the ceiling with a clatter, thick blood oozing out of its ragged wound. She turned back towards the entrance and ran, hearing the platter of claws against the mesh overhead. Another of the aberrant monkey-like things swung down in front of her, and Jill ducked, afraid to stop running. The thing's strange arm whistled past her ear, missing her head by less than an inch. The metal doors were in front of her. Jill crashed into them, slapping one handle down and stumbling back into the cold stillness of the corridor. The door closed on the furious, shrill cry of one of the monsters, rising high over the sounds of the working machines. She sagged against the door, gasping, and saw Barry Burton standing midway down the chilled, silent hall. He hurried towards her, an expression of deep worry on his rugged, bearded face. "Jill, are you all right?" She pushed away from the door, surprised. "God, Barry, where have you been? I thought you'd gotten lost in the tunnels." Barry nodded grimly. "I did, and I ran into some trouble trying to get out." She saw splatters of blood on his clothing, the rips and tears in his shirt, and realized he must have come across more of the walking green nightmares. He looked like he'd been through a war. Speaking of, Jill touched her shoulder, her fingers coming away bloody. It was painful but shallow. She'd survive. "Barry, we've got to get out of here. I found some papers upstairs, proof of what's been going on. Enrico was right. Umbrella's behind all this, and one of the stars knew about it. It's too dangerous to keep looking around. We should get those files and head back to the mansion and wait for the RPD." "But I think I found the main lab," Barry said. "Downstairs there's an elevator shaft to the end of the hall. There are computers and stuff. We can get into their files, really nail them." He didn't seem excited by the find, but Jill barely noticed. With the information they could get from Umbrella's database, names, dates, research material, we could find out everything, present the investigators with a whole messy package. Jill nodded, grinning. "Lead the way." The tunnels had been a cold, miserable maze, but the map had led them through quickly. Rebecca and Chris had reached the first basement level, both of them shivering and wet, not a little freaked out by the dead creatures they'd passed along the way. The Umbrella scientists had been disgustingly creative in their approach to making monsters. Chris rattled the door that supposedly led to the heliport, but it was solidly locked, an emergency sign next to it implying that it could only be opened in an alarm system. He'd hoped to send Rebecca out with the radio while he searched for the others. He looked down the narrow stairwell inside, turning to her. "I want you to stay here. If you stand by the elevator, you should be able to pick up Brad's signal from the outside. Tell him where we are and what happened. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, get back to the courtyard and wait there until help arrives." Flustered, Rebecca shook her head. "But I want to go with you. I can take care of myself. And if you find the lab, you need me to tell you where you're looking at." "No. For all we know, Wesker already killed the other stars and is looking to finish the job. We're the last ones. We can't risk both of us getting ambushed. Somebody has to survive and tell people about Umbrella. I'm sorry, but it's the only way." He smiled at her, putting her hand on her shoulder. "And I know you can take care of yourself. This isn't about your competence, okay? 20 minutes. I just have to see if anyone else made it." Rebecca opened her mouth as if to protest further, but then closed it, nodding slowly. "Okay, I'll stay 20 minutes. Chris turned and started down the ladder, hoping he could keep his promise to come back. The captain had successfully deceived them all, acting as part of the concerned leader for weeks while the people in Raccoon City had died, and all along he'd known why. The man was a sociopath. It seemed that Umbrella had created more than one kind of monster, and it was time to find out how much damage he'd done. Barry couldn't bring himself to... it keeps swapping back and forth so quickly between the people now, since they're all in the labs. Barry couldn't bring himself to look at Jill as they took the elevator down to B4. Jill would be waiting for them at the bottom, and Jill wouldn't find out that he had been helping the captain all along. He'd killed 3 more of the violent springing creatures down in the tunnels before making it into the lab, only to run into Wesker, who had insisted that he lured Jill down to B4 and assist him in locking her up. The smiling bastard reminded Barry of his family's situation and promised again that it was the last thing he'd have to do. After Jill was safely locked away, he'd call his people off. Except he said that every time. Find the crests and you're free. Help me in the tunnels, you're free. Betray your friend. Barry, are you okay? He turned to her as the elevator stopped, looking miserably into her concerned, thoughtful eyes. I've been worried about you ever since we got to the mansion. she said, laying a hand across his arm. I even thought, well, never mind what I thought. Is something wrong? He pulled the gate open and raised the mesh outer door in his excuse to look away. Yeah, something's wrong, he said quietly. But now's not the time. Let's just get this over with. Jill frowned and nodded, still looking concerned. Okay, when this is over, we can talk. You won't want to talk to me when this is over. Barry stepped out into the short hallway and Jill followed, their boots clanking across the steel grate. The hall turned to the left just ahead of Barry and slowed down on a pretense, checking his weapon, letting Jill get in front of him. He turned the corner and Jill froze, staring into the muzzle of Wesker's raised Beretta. He grinned at them, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, his smile smug and leering. Hello, Jill. Nice of you to stop by, he said, smoothly. Nice work, Barry. Take your weapons. She turned her startled gaze to him as he quickly plucked the shotgun from her hands and then reached around to unholster her Beretta, his face burning. Now get back to B1 and wait for me by the exits. I'll be up in a few minutes. Barry stared at him. But you said you just wanted to walk her up. Wesker shook his head. Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to hurt her, I promise. Now get going. Jill looked at him, confusion and fear and anger playing across her face. Barry? I'm sorry, Jill. He turned and walked around the corner, feeling defeated and ashamed, not to mention terrified for Jill. Wesker had promised, but Wesker's word meant nothing. He'd probably kill her as soon as he heard the elevator doors close. But what if I'm not in the elevator? Maybe I can still do something to keep her alive. Barry hurried to the lift and opened the gates, then slammed them closed and pushed the operation switch, sending it back to B3 without a passenger. Moving silently, he edged back towards the corner, listening. I can't say that I'm all I can't say that I'm all surprised, Joe was saying. How did you get Barry to help you? Wesker laughed. Old Barry's got some trouble at home. I told him that Umbrella has a team watching his house, waiting to kill his precious family. He was only too happy to help. Barry clenched his fist, his jaw tight. You're a bastard, you know that, Jill said. Maybe, but I'm going to be a rich bastard when all this is over. Umbrella is paying me a lot of money to clean up the little problem, and to get rid of a few goddamn snooping stars in the process. Why would Umbrella want to destroy the stars? Jill asked. Oh, not all of them. They got big plans for some of us. At least those of us that want to make a profit. It's you sniveling do-gooders that they don't want. It's red, white, and blue, apple pie, all that happy bullshit. The way the Redfield's been running around, mouthing off about conspiracies. You think Umbrella didn't notice? It has to stop here. This whole place is rigged to blow up in just in case of an accident, and the tyrant virus escaping qualifies. Once you're all dead, this facility's destroyed. No one will be able to get the truth. Son of a bitch is gonna kill all of us. But enough about Umbrella. I had you brought down here for a little experiment of my own. You see how our most agile team member stands up against the miracle of modern science, if you just step through that door. Barry flattened himself against the wall as Wesker stepped back, part of his shoulder coming into view. He put his hand on his Colt and drew it out slowly. I can't believe you're doing this, Jill said. Selling out to protect a bunch of unethical corporate blackmailers? Blackmailers? Oh, you mean Barry. Umbrella wouldn't bother with blackmail. They can afford to buy people just as easily. I made all that up to get him on board. Barry slammed the butt of his Colt into Wesker's skull as hard as he could, dropping him like a ton of bricks. Woo! Woo! He got him! Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Barry just looking for an excuse to confront Wesker, literally. He had the Rev 2 stealth attacks all along. That's right. You know he did. Barry said, I'm the captain now. I'll tell you what, doing the Wesker voice kind of takes a lot out of me. More than I thought. Definitely enjoying having this water, though. The water helps a lot, honestly. It ain't easy being Wesker. That's right. It's not. I'm telling you, it's not. Alright. to my phone instead of the book. It just goes to show you how much I read stuff on my phone. Alright. Chapter 19. Jill stared in astonishment as Wesker suddenly stopped talking and crumpled to the floor, and Barry stepped into view, staring down into Wesker's body with a look of intense hatred, Colt in hand. She crouched down next to Wesker and pried the Beretta from his fingers, tucking it into her waistband. Barry turned to look at her, his eyes swimming with apology. Jill, I'm so sorry. I never should have believed him. Jill stared at him for a moment, thinking about his daughters. Moira was Becky McGee's age. It's okay, she said finally. You came back. That's what matters. Barry handed her back her weapons, and they both gazed down at Wesker's sprawled form, still breathing, but unconscious. He was out cold. I don't suppose you have any handcuffs on you? Barry asked. Jill shook her head. Maybe we should check out the lab. There's bound to be some cable or cord we can use. Besides, I'm kind of curious about this miracle in modern science he was talking about. She turned and found the switch that operated the hydraulic door, noting the biohazard symbol painted across the front. The door slid open and the two of them stepped inside. Wow. It was huge. High ceiling chamber lined with monitoring consoles, the cables snaking across the floor and connecting into a whole series of standing glass tubes. There was 8 of the tubes lined up in the center of the room, and each of them big enough to hold a grown man. They were all empty. Barry reached down and scooped up a handful of the cable, digging into his pocket for a knife, while Jill walked towards the back, gazing at the technical and medical equipment, and stopped, staring, feeling her jaw drop. Back against the wall was a much larger tube, at least 8 or 9 feet tall, hooked up to its own computer console, and the thing inside filled it, top to bottom. It was monstrous. Jill, I got the cable. Barry stopped next to her, his words faltering as he saw the abomination. Silently, they both walked towards it, and unable to resist a closer look. It was tall, but proportionally correct, at least though the broad, muscular torso and long legs. Those parts appeared human. One of its arms had been altered into a cluster of massive dragon claws hanging past its knees, while the other seemed ordinary, if overly huge. There was a thick, bloody tumor protruding from where its heart would be, and Jill realized, staring at the bulbous mass, that it was the thing's heart. It was pulsing slowly, expanding and contracting in slow, rhythmic beats. She stopped in front of the tube, awed by the abomination. She could see the lines of scar tissue snaking across its limb, surgical scars. It had no sexual organs. They'd been cut away. She looked up at its face and saw the parts of its flesh there that had also been removed. The lips were gone, and it seemed to grin broadly at her through the sliced red tissue of its face, all of its teeth exposed. Tyrant, Barry said quietly. Jill glanced over him and saw him frowning down at the computer that was hooked up to the tube by multiple cables. She looked back at the tyrant, feeling overwhelmed by its pity and disgust. Whatever it was now, it had once been a man. Umbrella had turned him into a freakish horror. We can't leave it like this, she said softly, and Barry nodded. She joined him at the console, looking down at the myriad of switches and buttons. There had to be a switch that would put an end to its life. It deserved that much. There was a set of 6 red switches in a row along the bottom, and Barry had flipped one of them down. Nothing seemed to happen. He glanced at her, and she nodded for him to continue. He used the side of his hand to flip all of them. There was a sudden dull thump, and they both whirled away and saw the tyrant pull back its human hand and hit the glass again. Cracks webbed out from the impact, though the glass had to be several inches thick. Oh, shit! Barry grabbed her arm as the creature drew its bleeding knuckles back for another blow. Run! They ran, Jill wishing to God that they left it alone, panic welling up from deep inside her. Barry slammed his hand down on the door control and it slid open as behind them, glass shattered. They stumbled through the door, terrified, Barry hitting the lock, and saw that Wesker was gone. Wesker stumbled towards the power room, his head pounding, his limbs feeling strangely distant and weak. He felt like he was going to throw up. God damn it, Barry. He'd taken his gun. He'd come to as they'd walked to the lab and reeled toward the elevator, cursing them both, cursing Umbrella for creating such a screwed up mess, cursing himself for not simply killing the stars when he could have. It's not over. I'm still in control. This is my game. The sample case was down in the lab, probably, being destroyed right now by one of those idiots. Tyrant, too, that magnificent creature, powerless without the adrenaline injections, dead. They'd shoot him in his sleeping heart, and he'd die without ever tasting battle. Wesker reached the door to the room and leaned against it, struggling to catch his breath. Blood dribbled out of his ears as he shook his head, trying to clear it of a strange fog that settled into his brain. He didn't have the tissue samples, but he could still complete the mission. It was important, very important, that he complete his mission. It was about control, and control was his game. Triggering system, watch out for monkeys. The MA2s had to be careful. Wesker opened the door and pitched forward, the ground seeming too far away and then too close. Machines were hissing at him, whining and hissing in the hot, oily air. His hand found the railing and he pulled himself toward the back of the room, trying to hurry, but finding that his legs weren't interested. A claw shot down from above and tore into his scalp, yanking away a clump of hair. He felt warm liquid trickle down the back of his neck and stumbled on, the pain in his head sharper now. Took my gun, stupid assholes, took my gun. He reached the door and just managed to get it open when something heavy landed on his back, knocking him into the next room. He fell on the cold metal floor and a terrible shriek sounded in his ear. Thick talons punctured the skin on his back and Wesker slapped at it, and the grinning, screaming thing was trying to kill him. He hit the creature as hard as he could, shoving the heel of his hand into its throat. It leaped away, landing on the mesh wall and clambering back up to the ceiling. Wesker pulled himself up and stumbled on, fresh waves of pain and nausea washing over him. The air was too hot, the turbines loud, and the relentless in their spinning, throbbing frenzy. But he could see the door to the back now, the door that led to the completion of his mission. All the stars dead, blown into orbit while I escape. Fly away, rich man. He flung the door open and made his way toward the small glowing screen in the back corner. It was quieter here, cooler. The massive machines that filled the chamber hummed softly at him, their purpose quite different than that of the ones outside. These were the machines that wanted to help him regain his control. The noise from the open door behind him seemed far away as he reached the glowing screen, his fingers numb as they touched the keyboard beneath. He found the keys he needed, the code spilling out across the monitor in soft green, only after a few mistakes. A sexy, quiet voice informed them that the countdown would begin in 30 seconds. Dizzy, he tried to remember the setting for the timer. The system would trigger automatically in 5 minutes, but he had to reset it, give himself time to get reoriented and make his way outside. Behind him, something screamed. Wesker whirled around confused and saw 4 of the mesh monkeys running at him, lashing out with long curved hands as they reached him. Terrible pain shot through his legs as he fell, crashing to the hard steel floor. This can't happen. One of the creatures jumped onto his chest, and suddenly Wesker couldn't breathe, couldn't even raise his weak arms to push it away. Another tore into his left leg, ripping away a chunk of flesh with its hooked claw. A third and fourth screamed in savage glee, dancing around him like dark, vicious children, lifting their claws as they pranced on squat legs. Somehow there was blood in his eyes, and the world was spinning away, screams and hisses and incredible searing heat of blurring his vision. His mind, tyrant, has come. Wesker could feel it. He could feel the presence of something vast and powerful touching him. Grinning through the pain, he searched for it through in the red haze of his failing vision, wanting more than anything to see it slaughter his attackers in a glory of perfect motion. But he could only make out the immense shadow that seemed to flood over him, through him. Could only imagine that the powerful, magnificent warriors reaching down to lift him from his torment. I control, let me see! Darkness stole his hopes away, and Wesker thought no more. Stars Alpha Team, bravo. Anybody, if you can't answer, try to signal. I'm running out of fuel. Do you read? This is Brad. Repeat, Stars Alpha Team. Rebecca hit the button, talking fast. Brad, there's a helicopter at the Spencer estate. You have to get to the heliport. Brad, come in. There's a high whining squeal, and Rebecca heard what must have been the word copy, but the rest was lost. I copy, or do you copy? There's no way to know. Frustrated and worried, Rebecca held onto the radio tightly, hoping that he'd heard her. Suddenly, a shrill alarm blared into the silent room, though some hidden speaker in the ceiling. Rebecca jumped, staring at the cold chamber helplessly. There was a buzzing click from inside, and the door that led to the heliport, and she hurried over, grabbing the handle and pulling it open. It had unlocked. A cool female voice began to speak, slowly and clearing over the jangling alarm. The triggering system has now been activated. All personnel must evacuate immediately and process deactivation. You have 5 minutes. Triggering system has now been activated. As the recorded message repeated, Rebecca stood in the open doorway and watched the open ladder shaft, her blood racing, waiting to see Chris emerge from the levels below. He'd only been gone a few minutes, but their time had just run out. Chapter 20. We're almost there. Woo! Let's read these I can't stay, but I want to show my love and appreciation for who you are and those that you do. May you make YouTube an infinitely better place. Oh, thank you, Ravel. It's amazing. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. It's amazing. Thank you. We're almost done with the book, too. We're gonna finish it today. So you're gonna have something great to watch next time. Thank you so much. It's amazing. Wesker did wish for a nap at some point, to be fair. Yeah, they did. So they want to put the tire out of its misery. Meanwhile, Chris and Neptune fight me. Yeah, literally. No, Wesker, Code Veronica is your game. That's right. Wesker getting triple teamed on the floor. I'm in control. You're one of a kind, Serena. Thank you, Ravel. Also, just say it. Welcome to stream. It's a pleasure to see you. As always. Thank you so much. Super W. W's all around for Wesker. W's for Wesker. I can't believe we just watched Bro. I can't believe we just read Bro getting killed by the by the I can't even remember the name right now. But that's crazy. Like Wesker thought no more. It's wild. Hey chat, gotta head out. Have a great stream. WC. Yeah, you too, Ravel. I'll see you later, okay? Bye-bye. Get some water before I start reading again. Thank you for the hearts, by the way. Yay, hydrate. That's right. It's really nice for like, because like my throat's kind of hurting, like reading so much, like talking so much. Now I understand why when people do like speeches and stuff like that, they always have like a little water bottle on like the podium. It's like now I get it. Like yeah, it kind of kills your throat talking like so consistently like that. Pretty cool. Alright, let's continue. Thank you for the hearts, by the way. In Chapter 20. Jill and Barry ran from the elevator back towards the main hall of B3, the cool voice informing them that they had 4.5 minutes. They hit the open corridor at a dead run, sprinting around the corner, and saw Chris Redfield halfway up the metal stairs. "Chris!" Jill shouted. He spun around, his face lighting up as he saw them dashing toward them. "Hurry!" he shouted. "There's a heliport on B1." Thank God. Chris waited until they reached the base of the stairs, and he ran ahead, rushing around the walkway, holding the door open that led to the ladder. Jill and Barry made it to the top and sped through, the computer telling them they had 4 minutes, 15 seconds to get away. Barry went up the ladder first, and Jill followed, Chris right behind. They piled out into B1. Jill saw that Rebecca Chambers was standing at the emergency exit, her youthful face tight with anxiety. Chris hustled her through the door, and the four of them ran through the winding concrete hall, Jill praying silently that they have time to clear the estate. "I hope you burn here, Wesker." There's a large elevator at the end of the corridor, and Barry slammed the gate open, holding it as they rushed inside. He jumped in after them. They had 4 minutes even. The elevator seemed to crawl upward, and Jill looked at her watch, heart pounding as the seconds ticked past. "Not gonna make it. We'll never make it." The lift hummed to a stop, and Chris yanked the gate open, the cool air of the early morning sweeping over them, and the sweet, wondrous sound of a helicopter overhead circling. "He heard me!" Rebecca shouted, and Jill grinned, feeling a sudden wave of affection for the rookie. The helicopter port was huge. The wide, flat space surrounded by high walls, and the circle of yellow paint on the asphalt showing Brad where to set down. Barry and Chris both waved their arms frantically, signaling the pilot to hurry as Jill looked at her watch again. A little over 3.5 minutes remained, more than enough time. Jill whirled around and saw chunks of concrete and tar fly into the air and rain down over the northwest corner of the landing pad. A giant claw stretched up from the hole and fell across the jagged lip. And a pale, hulking tyrant leaped out into the heliport, rose smoothly from its agile crouch, and started towards them. What the hell is that? It had to be 8 feet tall, parts of its giant body mutilated and deformed, its grinning face focusing on them even as it stood up. It moved toward them at a slow walk, the massive claw of its left arm flexing. No time, Brad can't land. Chris targeted the dark, tumorous thing on its chest and fired, pulling the trigger 5 times in rapid succession. 3 rounds finding their mark. The other 2 were within an inch of the pulsing redness, and the creature didn't even slow down. "Scatter!" Barry yelled. The stars split, Jill pulling Rebecca to the furthest corner of the towering monster, Chris sprinting toward the southern wall. Barry stood his ground, pointing his Colt at the approaching beast. 3 .357 rounds slammed into its belly, the thundering shots echoing across the high concrete walls. The creature suddenly sped up, running toward Barry, drawing its giant claw back. As Barry dove out of the way, the thing swept past him in a running crouch, bringing its claw up as if throwing a ball underhand. Its talons gouged the asphalt, ripping through it as though it was no more than solid water. As soon as the monster was past, it stopped running, turning almost casually back to watch Barry scramble to his feet and fire again. The bullet took out a fleshy chunk of its right shoulder. Thick blood coursed down its wide chest and joined the dripping, open mass of its stomach. Overhead, the Alpha Copter still circled, unable to land, and there was still no sign that the immense creature felt the injuries. It started its run again, dropping its terrible, inhuman hand down as it went for Barry, just as his revolver clicked on empty. Barry sprinted away, but the charging monster veered with him. Its sweeping claw glanced against his side, tumbling him to the ground. "Barry!" Chris raced toward the creature, firing into its back as it bent down over the fallen Alpha. Barry was scrambling backwards, his vest shredded, his eyes wide with terror. And it must have felt the sting of the bullets because it turned, fixing its emotionless stare on Chris. Barry staggered to his feet and limped quickly away. "We don't have any time." Chris emptied the clip, the last several rounds hitting it in the face. Pieces of tooth flew from the creature's lipless mouth, splattering into the asphalt in a rain of white and red. The creature didn't seem to notice as it started to run toward him at incredible speed. Jill and Rebecca were both firing, shouting, trying to turn its attention away from Chris, but it was already fixated, pounding towards him and drawing its claw back. Wait for it. He dove to the side at the last possible second as the monster went flying past, its claw mulching the asphalt where he had just been standing. Chris ran, the horrible awareness dawning on him that the seconds were slipping past and that they couldn't kill it in time. Barry felt blood seeping from his thigh, the top several layers of skin sliced neatly away by the tyrant's brutal swipe. The pain was bearable. The knowledge that they weren't going to die wasn't. "We'll blow up if we don't get chopped to pieces first." Tyrant turned its attention to Jill and Rebecca, both of them firing again at the seemingly invulnerable monster. It started its smooth, easy walk toward them, still indifferent to the bloody holes in its body. Shotgun blasts hit it in the legs and chest. 9mm bullets speckled its pasty flesh, and it didn't falter, kept on walking. Wind whipped down over Barry as the roar of the helicopter's blades suddenly got louder. He heard a screaming shout come from above. "Incoming!" Barry stared at the copter hovering only 20 feet from the ground and saw the heavy black object fly out of the open door on the side, hitting the tar with an audible thud. Chris was closest. He ran for it. The tyrant had almost reached Jill and Rebecca. The two of them split, each headed in a different direction, and the creature turned toward Jill without hesitating, tracking her with its strange, fixed gaze. "Jill, this way!" Chris screamed. Barry spun and saw that Chris had the bulky rocket launcher propped on his shoulder. "Yes!" Jill veered toward Chris, the tyrant close behind. "Clear!" She leaped to one side and rolled as Chris fired. The whoosh of the rocket-propelled grenade almost lost to the thundering beat of the copter's rotors. The explosion wasn't. The grenade hit the tyrant square in the chest, and a burst of incendiary light and deafening sound it blew the monster into a million smoking pieces. Even as the tattered shreds of flesh and bone hailed down over them, Brad lowered the copter back toward the ground and the 4 stars ran for it. The rails hadn't even touched yet as Jill dove into the open cabin, Chris and Rebecca and Barry all throwing themselves in after. "Go, Brad, now!" Jill screamed. The bird lifted into the air and sped away. Hey, Sinister, how's it going? Long time no see. Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you. I'm surprised no one was locked in jail by Wesker. Yeah, right? That's cool. Dang it, Barry, count your rounds. Don't make Chris carry. I know. I know. Alright, chapter 21. The calm female voice fell only on inhuman airs. You have 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. System activation now. The circuit that ran the length and width of the estate connected. An earth-shaking thunderclap of motion and sound, the Spencer estate exploded. Devices went off simultaneously in the basement of the mansion, beneath the reservoir, behind a plain, uninteresting fireplace in the guardhouse, and the third level of the basement laboratories. Marble walls tumbled down over the disintegrating floors of the fine old mansion. Rock collapsed and concrete blew into a fine blackened dust. Massive fireballs rose up into the early morning sky, and it could be seen from miles away in their brief few seconds of brilliant light. As the incredible peal of booming sound rolled across the forest and died away, the wreckage started to burn. The four of them were quiet as Brad piloted the copter back toward the city. Nobody had a million questions. Something about their silence didn't invite conversation. Chris and Joe were both staring out the hatch window at the spreading fire that had been the estate, their expressions grim. Barry was slumped against the cabin wall, looking down at his hands like he'd never seen them before. The new girl was quietly moving among them, treating their wounds without saying a word. Brad kept his mouth shut, still feeling crappy about taking off earlier. He'd been through hell since then, flying around in circles and watching the fuel gauge slowly drop. It had been a total nightmare. He had to take a piss like nobody's business. And then that monster. He shuddered. Whatever it had been, he was glad it was dead. It had taken all of his nerve to not fly away the second he'd laid eyes on it. And as far as he was concerned, he deserved a little consideration for managing to kick the launcher out the door. He glanced back at the silent foursome, wondering if he could tell them about the weird call he'd gotten over the radio. Right after the rookie had screamed something about a heliport through the static, a clear, solid signal had come in, a male voice calmly giving him the exact coordinates. The guy had been listening in, which was weird, but the fact that he knew the location well enough to give Brad directions was downright spooky. He frowned, trying to remember the mysterious man's name. Thad? Terrence? Trent, that was it. His name was Trent. Brad decided that he would keep it for another day. For now, he just wanted to go home. Yay! And that has been The Umbrella Conspiracy, as read by Sabrina Wesker. Yay! We did it! I told you guys we'd finish it tonight. See, now wasn't that a great book? Doesn't that make you want to read some of the other Resident Evil books? Brad giving himself some credit. Yeah, I know. It's just wild that bro even had the thought to fly away once he seen the tyrant. Like, bro's just gonna leave him to die. Like, he had to convince himself not to. Like, come on, Brad. Yeah, that's a good book. There we go. Thank you for the hearts, by the way. Oh yeah, this is solid. Way more interested than the others now. Yeah, and if you guys want, leave a comment letting me know. I wouldn't mind reading some of the other books for you guys. I don't know if I might not read like the ones that don't pertain to the games, like Caliban Cove. It's a good book. It's just I prefer the ones that like follow the games, because it's like cool getting like all that like background knowledge on like things that could have been happening in the background. So if you guys want me to read another book, I will probably do 0 Hour, the one that goes over Resident Evil 0. So if you're interested in that, comment and let me know, and we'll do it. I really wouldn't mind. I love reading to you guys. It's really cool. I'm gonna have to think of some new voices though for the character. Like what am I gonna voice Billy's voice like? You know, like I got Rebecca's voice, so like that's good. But yeah. Nice place, haha. ASMR for the win. That's right! See, yeah, you guys want some Sabrina Wesker ASMR, right? Just sit there and listen to me. It was great. Stuff like Caliban Cove still sounds cool. Oh, okay. I mean, it does follow Rebecca, so if you guys want, I could even... This has the first chapter of Caliban Cove in it. I could read that. See what you think about it, see if it sounds interesting or enough, or intriguing. Well, yeah. It was awesome. Yeah, well, I guess this wraps up today's stream. I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys did too. You are decently audible, so it's not quite ASMR. You get the point, though. I'm not whispering or nothing, but... If you're not in the Discord, I highly recommend you check it out. We do an after show, after stream. We'll do all kinds of fun stuff in there. Play with mods, go through games we wouldn't normally play on stream, do tier lists. There's all kinds of fun stuff, so I highly recommend you guys check it out. The link is in the description and on my page. So, check it out. You also get a lot of, like, important information, like, if I'm going to be late to stream, so... It might be worth it. Even if you don't have, like, a Discord account, it might be worth it just to make one to get the information, you know? I mean, you guys are here, like, every week anyway. You might as well. Right? I wonder where this one is going to end up on the RE novel tier list in the future. Yeah, that's a good point. Because you know I'm going to do it. Like, I try and tier list everything. And the tier list can be found in the tier list channel on Discord as well, if you guys are interested. But yeah, it's gonna be up there, that's for sure. Out of all the books I've read in the Resident Evil series, I think honestly they're all pretty like A or S tier. There's not really bad ones. S.D. Perry is like a really great author, so they're all very interesting. So it's probably going to be a very, like, on the top end of the tier list. Yeah, I think the reading is great, especially in the RE universe. Yeah, exactly. I agree. I agree completely. It's totally on brand for the channel. Gives me something more interesting to do with you guys that isn't necessarily gameplay. And, it's just a cool experience, to say the least. So, thank you guys for supporting me through this journey. So next week on Tuesday at 6 p.m. we will be back with Resident Evil 6, the chronological order playthrough. We're going to be starting with Leon chapter 3, where the shark is, so that's going to be very exciting and heart-pounding. You guys don't want to miss that. So, and then Wednesday will be a surprise. So, we finished the book, so we don't have that next week. It's going to be a surprise, you'll see. Becky and Wesker were my fave here. Yeah, I really want to know, what were your guys' favorite, like, voices that I did? I put a lot of effort into that. So. But yeah, I think I come to the same conclusion. Rebecca and Wesker were just top tier. Like, they made that book as good as it was. No offense to Chris. Chris is still the GOAT. But you would know if you looked at my RE character tier list on Discord. Chris is up there. So, no offense to him, but Rebecca shined in this. and all the parts of Wesker getting mad and all that was just so on brand for his character. It was, oof, perfection. So yeah. Oh, I just remembered what I was gonna say earlier too. So tell me how I was messing around earlier with like the meta AI thing, trying to come up with some funny pictures, and I typed in clankers just to see what would come up. Like show me an image of a clanker, thinking that it would give me like probably like one of the robots from Star Wars, because that's where the phrase like originated and then like became adopted to explain to like be a slur towards like AI. And so I was interested to see what it would think. And you know what it did? It gave me pictures of Charlotte's. I said something offensive to the AI and it fed me pictures of my biggest fear. If that is not the wildest thing you have ever heard, I do not know what beats it. Cause that I was blown away. And I'm not making this up. Like it was legit. Like it actually gave me pictures of Charlotte's for typing in the word clankers to the AI. I'm blown away. If the AI ever turn on us, I'm fucking pleading my allegiance, because I am not gonna be psychologically tortured like that. I can't take it, I'm telling you right now. They fighting back, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like it was terrifying. It was such an eye opener too. It was like, I will never mess around with that again. I'll leave them alone. They got me. Anyway, yeah, interesting little story of something that happened today to wrap up today's stream. I hope you all have a wonderful night, an even better week, and an even better weekend. I will see you all on Tuesday. Let me type my good night here. There we go. But yeah, have a wonderful night, you guys. I had a lot of fun tonight. It was great. I really want to do more reading for you guys. So, good night, guys.